'Twas the night before Christmas, when all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. The traps were all set by the chimney with care, in hopes that St. Nicholas soon would step there. The children were nestled all snug in their beds, while nightmares of body parts danced in their heads, and Mamma with her hatchet and I with my axe had just settled down for a little nightcap. When out on the lawn there arose such a clatter, I sprung from my chair to see what made the splatter. Away to the window I flew like a flash, tore open the shutters and ripped through the sash. The moon on the breast of the blood-stained snow gave a hideous glow to objects below, when what to my wandering eyes should appear? The watchman was dead, with a knife in his ear. There on the lawn knelt a man rather thick. The blood on his coat told me he was St. Nick. More rapid than vultures he sprang to his feet. This zombified Santa was hungry for meat. "Where are the children? I want them now. Bring them down to me, you ugly fat cow. On time and impatient I've come to your home. I hunger for brains, and I'm not alone." As dry leaves that before the wild hurricane fly, a legion of demons flew down from the sky, and up to the housetop this evil took roost, with red beady eyes and long pointed tooth. And then, in a heartbeat, I heard on the roof the digging and pawing of each demon hoof. As I drew in my hand and was turning around, down the chimney St. Nicholas came, down with a growl. He was dressed in the hair of the dead he had skinned, and his clothes were blood-stained from both women and men. With a bundle of cutlery hung on his back, he grabbed for a knife and began his attack. His eyes, they stared through me. His smile, freaking scary. His nose was all wrinkled like an old rotten cherry. His droll little mouth was drawn up like a bow. He slashed at my leg, and I fell to the floor. The stump of my limb he held tight in his teeth, and the blood seeped from it to white tile beneath. He had a cruel face and some blood on his beard. His expression was empty. For my life I now feared. He was ugly and evil, a sick little elf. I knew things must change for my kids and myself. With my leg now missing and my wife surely dead, I pushed from the floor and kicked Nick in the head. He spoke not a word, but fell straight on his back, and all the traps sprung with a thunderous snap. Lying there, writhing, right where he fell, this bastard passed right through the gateway of hell. The demons then vanished. My children were safe. I sat there crying, beginning to faint. But before I passed out, I screamed with all my might, "Scary Christmas to all, and to all a good fright." Dearest listeners, our lives have few happy moments, few bright moments. Christmas is meant to be one of those. Often we see advertisements showing family and friends together sharing gifts, watching movies together around a fireplace. The tree is bright with ornaments, and not a face is sad or troubled. Painting these windows into what the holiday is supposed to be, in my humble opinion, causes more harm than good. I've seen darkness during these winter days. Last year I faithfully chronicled the testimony of a troubled spirit that found his way to St. Peter after coming to terms with all the misdeeds that he and others close to him have committed. It was a harrowing experience to weave together these stories. I've witnessed more tragedy related to the holidays. This time of year can cause very dreadful behavior between people. Some may try to hide it, cover up the wickedness with mirth, good tidings, but some sins can't be washed away. Some are stained on us for all eternity. The first incident. Miracle in Esther Springs. My work often takes me to strange places with even stranger people. This town is no exception. Winter had come early, fresh snow on the ground everywhere you looked. The bus pulled up to the corner of a bustling park, children laughing and tossing snowballs at each other in merriment. If you didn't look hard enough, you might even say the place was idyllic. But beneath the surface, A cauldron of secrets was brewing. There in the park, I saw snippets of it. Children slushing together icy water with the snow to harm one another and call it aimless fun. Parents busily on their phones, not even bothering to mind their kids. One could snatch them up in a moment and be gone before they even darted their eyes. But my business was elsewhere. Rumors had spread of a sickness that came to the Kraus residents. They owned a bed and breakfast near the center of the village, the biggest in this part of their countryside, and their patron, Patrick Kraus, had fallen ill. For weeks he was in a sickbed, coughing and hardly able to keep any food down. It was determined he likely would not make it through to see a proper Christmas. Yet then, the unthinkable happened. Patrick was suddenly better. Everyone in town was thrilled to see it happen. He was back to his old self, handling rooms, changing sheets, even cooking again. When I sat down with him for an interview, I heard an amazing story that explained how he had been healed. An angel of God visited me. I was praying, my wife and I, day and night for a solution. The doctors had gone, but our local deacon, Deacon Robert Harverson, you really must meet him, he insisted that if we had enough faith, that the sickness would be relieved of us. And so it happened. Only a few days later, the Lord blessed me, Patrick claimed. He said the angel came to him in a vision as a woman clothed in white. She had no mouth, but she whispered to him a secret message from God, Patrick said. He said the angel was providing a blessing not only to him, but to all of Ester Springs. I could tell the way that Mr. Kraus spoke he believed the tale, and others in the village said that they also had similar visions. A visit to the local church was in order. Deacon Harverson seemed like a decent man, a protector of the community. When I asked him his thoughts about this miracle, he told me that he was certain that the angel was there in the city, watching over them. I could tell you have gifts in you, kind normal people might be fearful of. But you can tell me, I don't believe for a moment that you're a journalist as you claim. Why did you come to find this angel? He asked. I could tell that lying would be pointless. Despite his calm facade, I knew that my presence here worried him. My powers were not the kind that he was accustomed to. But even when telling the truth, I knew that he wouldn't believe it. I'm a spirit medium. This time of year is special to me because the souls from beyond the grave often return to exchange stories to us in the living world near the winter solstice. I had hoped by coming here I'd be able to determine if this miracle of yours was indeed of divine origin. The deacon's smile faded. You'll forgive me for not being so welcome to the idea of such black magic. In fact, I would wager that your stay here is overdue. I gave him my name, and I declared my intentions to stay at the Kraus bed and breakfast until I was satisfied with my investigation. The man made me wary. It was people like him that use their position who often hurt others the most. Little did I realize that my arrival would spur desperation to move his vile heart towards more wrongdoing. That night, mulling over notes and peering toward the sleepy town of Ester Springs, I felt a chill in the air that was not just from the dropping temperature. Something despicable was occurring. I closed my eyes and used my powers to peer into the world beyond. This often saps my strength, but I felt that it was the only way I could get to the bottom of things. The threads of mystical energy that tethered this place to the earth spread out before me like a spiderweb in my mind's eye. All I needed to do was listen to the vibrations of those strings, find their source, and I would know what was troubling me about this scenic countryside. The long, winding road in my mental tapestry led to the local cemetery. A scream was coming from beneath the tombstones, but this was not that of a long-forgotten soul. I sensed a living spirit was somewhere trapped amidst these cadavers. Like lightning, I jumped into my clothes and rushed across town. It was dark, and it was difficult for me to be certain where I was going with my gift waning, but I kept moving forward. The cemetery, as it turned out, was easy enough to find. There was a small congregation that had formed there, crying over an open grave. Suddenly, I felt foolish. realizing the sounds I heard must have been coming from the crowd. Deacon Haverson looked up from his scriptures and smiled at me. "Come, join us, please. Grief should never be handled alone." Reluctantly, I complied and neared the edge of the grave, curious to see why they had chosen to have such a late funeral eulogy. There was a large, gaping hole which looked like it was leading into an underground entrance of a mausoleum. I saw there was, in fact, a woman bound there in rags, looking up at me with swollen eyes in fear. And then I felt hands on me and my body being pushed into the staircase. "Forgive us, stranger, but it's better you're locked down here until we can decide what to do with you," the deacon declared. Then suddenly there was dirt on top of us, and I frantically realized we were being buried into this catacomb. I moved to untie the woman, terrified of the reality that the townfolks were killing me for prying into their miracles. And then I pushed the casket aside and pulled her into the passages underneath the grave. Old tunnels likely built before the town itself. We listened as the churchgoers kept burying us inside, my heart sinking as I realized escape would likely be more difficult than I could imagine. But first my priority towards the trembling woman, her frail body, evident that these people had done her much harm. "What is your name?" I told her as we settled into the dark, stony room. I could see nothing around me, but above I heard the townsfolk beginning to sing carols. They were happy about the wicked deed they just participated in. It chilled me to my very core. "Lydia," she whispered, as we used each other for warmth. I could sense something was different about her. "Tell me, what have they done to you?" I begged. Lydia seemed reluctant, perhaps too traumatized by the experience. I knew it was a story I would need to hear, though, to unravel this mystery. But for now, I let the darkness comfort us, as I thought of how to escape and how to move forward. Saving the oxygen in the room would be vital, I realized fearfully. This holiday would be a long and perilous journey. I was certain of that. I first noticed the strange car 3 days before Christmas. So dented, scratched, and spattered with mud that it was impossible to tell what the original color had been. Its rusted metal guts rattled menacingly each time it rolled by. The driver was cruising my neighborhood looking for something, and there was something predatory about the way he inspected each house on the silent winter street. I felt myself tense up when the car passed by, like my body was readying itself for an attack. Even my dog Marvin huddled close to my leg, whimpering. And sure, maybe the driver was just a porch pirate looking to steal someone's holiday cheer, but you can never really be sure, can you? A shiver ran up my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. The brown car reminded me of everything I'd worked so hard to leave behind. Ugliness, danger. Neighborhoods where the stores had barred windows and gunshots rang out at night. I'd worked all my life to afford a house like the one I was in now, and the thought that all that could reach me even here was more than a little disconcerting. Lost in thought, I turned up my driveway. But Marvin had stopped and was growling at something. A rumbling engine pulled up beside me. The driver rolled down his window and shouted at me, "Howdy, neighbor! Any plans for the holidays?" I muttered something about staying home before it occurred to me that I should definitely not be sharing my plans with this weird stranger. He was a grizzled, middle-aged white guy with unkempt gray hair and wild eyes that suggested it had been a while since he'd last slept. His glare narrowed at my response. "You sure, pal? Not visiting family? Maybe travel someplace far away, you and your dog. Should really go someplace for a while. Maybe come back in the new year after things have settled down. You hear me? You really ought to get out of town." I was about to ask the guy who the hell he thought he was to tell me how to spend my time, but he'd already stepped off in a cloud of black exhaust. Scratching my head, I went inside to feed Marvin and make sure that all the doors were locked. I slept badly that night. My nightmares were filled with the haunted eyes of the man in the brown car. At one point, I even thought I felt his large, hairy hands pawing for me beneath the blankets. But said Marvin, readjusting himself in my side. I didn't notice the figure standing at the edge of my yard the next morning, not until they began to speak. I couldn't make out their features in the pre-dawn gloom, just a shapeless hat and bulky, ragged clothes that made them look like an overstuffed scarecrow. "Howdy, neighbor," they called out to me. "Any plans for the holidays?" It was the exact same phrase the man in the brown car had used, but his voice was different. Deep, guttural. It sounded more like an animal's trying to imitate human speech than an actual person talking. Inside the house, Marvin was going crazy. I suddenly had an awful feeling that maybe the stranger's stuffy clothes weren't there to keep off the cold, but rather they were hiding something horrible. Maybe even a lot of some things, all writhing and coiling together. It leaned uncannily towards me, and I realized for the first time just how tall it was. Shaking my head, I climbed into my half-defrosted car and backed out of the driveway. The thing's proportions were all wrong, its arms and torso too long, its legs too short and seemingly bent backwards. It stayed still, watching my taillights disappear around the corner. When I returned from home hours later, I was relieved to find that the house was still intact and Marvin was safe and sound. That night, as I fed the dog and made dinner for myself, it was easy to believe that I'd scared myself over nothing. At least, until the doorbell rang. Some instinct made me bring the kitchen knife with me when I went to answer it, and when I saw who was waiting on the other side, I was glad that I did. He was the man from the brown car. "What do you want?" I opened the door just a crack, leaving the chain on, even though the big man could probably have kicked it in if he wanted to. "Put the knife away and listen to me," the man snarled. "It won't do you any good against me anyway. You need to get out of town until it's over." "Until what's over?" I groaned. Marvin peeked out from behind me, crept towards the stranger and sniffed his boot. To my surprise, he actually seemed to like the guy. "Look, you don't have to believe me, but at least believe the symbol on your door." I moved my hand to undo the chain so that I could check the door, and then I hesitated. What if it was a trick? Yeah, the stranger stuck his hand inside the house. I tensed up, ready for anything, but he just scratched Marvin behind the ears. I undid the chain. Sure enough, barely visible marks had been scratched all around my Christmas wreath. They were twisting, serpentine, seemed to coil and rearrange themselves each time I looked away. "You could have put those there yourself," I told the man, not wanting to believe what I was seeing. "Sure I could have, but I didn't, and you know it. Trust me, go somewhere for a while, leave tonight before sunset. When you get back, your house might be a little torn up. At least you and your dog will be alive. Don't ask me why. Better off not knowing." "You have no idea what I went through to get this place," I snapped. "I'm not going to run off and leave it just because you say so. I mean, I don't even know your name." "It's Eddie." The big man stuck out his hand. "And I'm not going to stand here freezing on your front porch. If you really want to hear about it, invite me inside." I thought about vampires, fae, other storybook monsters that needed permission to enter a home. And then I shrugged and opened the door. I don't know who or what they are. A cult maybe, something else, something not even human. Eddie spoke into the cup of coffee I'd given him. We were seated at my kitchen table, Marvin at our feet. "All I know is there's things out there that hate the holiday season, things that prefer how it was before, when people believed that only a human sacrifice could keep the shortened days from fading into one last eternal night. They come creeping out of the darkness this time of year, thirsty for the blood that we no longer offer so willingly. 5 years ago, I was sitting where you are now. I hadn't heard the stories. Wouldn't have believed him if I had. I had a construction contractor with a house in the suburbs, a wife, 2 beautiful children. I'd never seen or experienced anything that could cause me to doubt the laws of science. And then, on Christmas Eve, I heard a knock on the door. Turned on the porch light and I saw 3 of them looking in the window. They looked young, like kids or teenagers, and they were wearing Halloween costumes. My first thought wasn't fear. Not even when I saw that dead, hollow look in their eyes. I was concerned. Below zero out there, one of them a pale blonde boy in a skeleton costume. He wasn't even wearing shoes. The girl behind him wearing a flimsy fairy costume with ripped up wings. Snow was falling right onto her bare skin. They were going to freeze to death out there, whoever they were, so I opened the door and that's when they took out their weapons. The boy in the skeleton costume pulled a length of chain with a meat hook on the end from his skull-shaped plastic bucket. The girl had been hiding a pair of butcher knives in her fairy wings, and another, whose shape was hidden by a bulky scarecrow costume, was holding a razor-sharp reaper's scythe. I tried to slam the door on him. The scarecrow swung it into the gap. The trio forced their way inside. I would have thought I was dreaming. The clang of metal digging into the walls was all too real. They started hacking down my decorations with a cold, passionless hatred I'd never seen before or since. And I ran. What else could I do? Didn't have a weapon. I had to warn my family. My kids were watching some movie in the family room, but my wife heard the destruction, came to investigate. She barely even had time to register my look of terror, for the girl in the fairy costume was on her, running across the wall like a goddamn spider, sinking her teeth into my wife's neck. Till the day I die, I'll never forget those teeth. They were filed down and sharp. Gums curled back like the girl was surviving on something that humans weren't meant to eat. If she was even human in the first place, that is. I looked around for a weapon. The only thing I had was a wine bottle from dinner. I shattered it on the head of the one attacking my wife, but the fairy costume girl didn't seem to notice. She just stared at me with those blank, dead eyes, and then I felt something wet running down my ribs. The scythe was so sharp I had barely felt it cut at first, but then it turned to agony. By that point, the kids were up and moving around, and all I could think of was them. I had to protect him, and pressing my hand against the bleeding gash on my side, I hobbled to the living room, and Scarecrow followed after me like he had all the time in the world. Lights were out in the living room. Christmas carols still playing on the TV. But to my horror, the kids were nowhere to be seen. Behind me, I could hear the sound of skeleton boys shredding more of our decorations, and I knew that it was only a matter of time before the intruders tore me apart just as mindlessly. I glanced down, and eyes were glittering beneath the couch. It was the kids. Their eyes got wide when they saw the crimson stain on the side of my white t-shirt, but I pressed my fingers to my lips and gestured that they should follow me. We kept low, crawling across the carpet, and hoping the hellish figures destroying our house would stop to peek over at the edge of the couch. We were almost to the basement stairs, and I smelled something burning. Thick, black smoke billowed up from the corner of the room where our Christmas tree was on fire. Backlit against the flames stood the skeleton boy, whirling his chain and looking right at us. I yelled at the kids to run. I threw myself at him. He wasn't even half my size, but it was like hitting a marble statue. Didn't even seem to notice the blows of my fist. Instead, he whipped me with the chain until I screamed in pain, blinded by my own blood, helpless to fight back. Metal links of the chain coiled around my neck, and I remember thinking, at least the kids got away. Then he tugged hard, ripping the skin of my neck, cutting me loose. I tumbled down into the basement. And even though the house was burning down around us, he walked down the stairs slowly. He kept me alive on purpose, but why? It's like the three of them were drawing energy from my pain and fear. I locked one of the basement doors behind me. Not like I thought it would do much good. I pulled my kids into a closet with me. I hugged them close, holding the spit-dampened cloth over my mouth against the tendrils of smoke that were creeping under the door. I heard the lock snap. Now the door flew open. Kids and I were soaked in sweat. I could hear the walls snap and crackle as flames consumed the house. But it wasn't loud enough to drown out the calm footsteps of the boy in the skeleton costume as he strolled towards our hiding place, dragging his chain along the floor behind him. Everything about me was becoming hazy and gray. My lungs felt like they were being squeezed, crushed slowly. Some enormous hand. Then came a sudden loud crack. And everything went black. According to the rescue workers, I'd passed out from smoke inhalation. After the central supports of the house collapsed, my kids, they said they were killed instantly. Ruptured water line prevented the fire from roasting me alive like my wife had been. I survived, but I was in rough shape. There were months of hospital care, rehabilitation, psychiatric evaluations. Bills left me penniless. The worst of all, these damn head doctors made me question what I knew had happened that night. They blamed my memories on smoke inhalation, brain damage. There's no evidence left to prove them wrong. I learned later that even if they had been, it wouldn't have mattered. By the time I got out of that place, I didn't know what was real anymore. Little by little, I did begin doing some research about holiday home invaders, and I realized that I wasn't alone. There are hundreds of cases, all written up as isolated incidents. Even though many of them shared the same characteristics, there were hardly ever any survivors. But if there were, they always described the same thing. People in costumes invaded their home to perpetrate acts of horrible violence. They always say set fire to structures afterward, like the people inside are some sort of burned sacrifice. When I took what I'd found to the police, I was ignored altogether. Whether that was because of incompetence or some kind of cover-up, couldn't say. After all, think about what would happen if the public knew that people were attacked at random every holiday season, and the authorities were powerless to stop it. It'd be a mass panic. So, in the end, I did the only thing I could do. I decided to fight back myself. At first I thought the attacks were random, but they were not. Eddie took out a map. A black spot marked the location of each attack. He connected them in lines of red marker that crept across the paper like blood. He seemed to form a half-finished symbol, star with too many points. So I knew the next attack was going to happen in this neighborhood when I saw the symbol on your door. Eddie had run out of words. His voice was hoarse, almost desperate. I had the feeling that it had been a long time since he'd spoken like this to another human being. Maybe that was why we'd both gotten lost in his story and forgotten about the time. 3 knocks came at the door, so hard and heavy that the whole house seemed to shake. My eyes darted to the window. It was dark outside. The blood rushed from Eddie's face. Oh God. I was too late. They're already here. He pressed a finger to his lips and directed me to follow him down the hallway. In the shadows of the porch, I could barely make out a skull-painted face pressed against the glass. I grabbed Marvin and nodded towards the back. He could slip out across the yard, and the back door flew off its hinges before I could finish my thought. A bulky figure in a scarecrow costume stepped through it, cutting down the rows of stockings that hung on the wall with a single swipe of its scythe. Marvin lunged towards it, barking his head off. His collar slipped through my fingers, and the hulking, tattered figure turned towards him. Bang! The deafening blast repeated 4 times more as Eddie crossed the kitchen towards the scarecrow man, a .45 caliber rifle in his shaking hand. Not again, he snarled. Not this time. Eddie's shots hadn't had the impact they should have. The scarecrow was still standing. Either there was some kind of body armor beneath those filthy rags, or whatever was under there wasn't human. It flung its scythe at Eddie. I looked away just in time, but couldn't block out the awful sound of a sharpened blade cutting into meat. As the scarecrow crossed the kitchen to finish the job, I heard something else. The front door creaking open and the steady whirling of a chain. Skeleton Boy had broken in somehow, which left only one. Where was the girl with the fairy wings? At first I thought the noise was coming from inside the walls. Then I saw a pale, soot-covered hand emerging from the hearth. Like some diabolical version of Santa Claus, she'd come down the chimney. Eddie hadn't been able to stop the invaders, but the distraction had given me time to grab Marvin's collar and drag him upstairs with me. I was panicking, but I had a plan. Crawl out onto the roof, jump down into the yard, run across the snow as fast as my legs could take me. I could smell smoke from down below, and hear footsteps on the stairs behind me. They moved slowly, just like Eddie had said, savoring our fear and helplessness. But Marvin and I weren't going to wait around to be strangled by a chain, hacked apart by a scythe, or eaten alive. I dragged my howling dog into the bedroom and blocked the doorknob with a chair. I flung open a window, letting a flurry of snow in. Marvin whimpered when I set him down on the slick shingles. I stroked his fur and tried to keep him calm as I climbed outside myself. The roof was treacherous. We didn't have much time. The reflection of flames flickered on the snow below us, and fire alarms were going off throughout the house. We skidded on the cramped, icy roof as we crept around to the back and jumped. My ankle folded under me, and pain shot up my leg, but Marvin was safe in my arms. When I set him down, he wagged his tail, cocking his head to the side and looking curiously at the burning house behind me. He followed me as I limped towards the house of the nearest neighbor, hoping that they, too, hadn't received a visit from the nightmarish trick-or-treaters. But when I turned to look over my shoulder, I saw 3 dark figures staring out the window of my flaming kitchen, watching me run like they had all the time in the world. Mrs. Fisher across the street didn't understand my incoherent story, but she could see the fire out of her window clearly enough. She called 911, made me a cup of tea, and even brought Marvin some ancient dog biscuits she'd found somewhere. But when the emergency services arrived, there was no sign of the invaders that I described. Just like before with Eddie's family, the fire destroyed all evidence of their presence. Between the clear case of arson and Eddie's charred body, it was clear that something had happened. But no one was willing to believe my version of the events. It's been a year since that night, and the case remains open. Now as the days get colder and the nights grow longer, I think more and more about Eddie, about how he thought that he had escaped them, about how he thought he was the hunter instead of the hunted, and it makes me wonder, am I going to get another visit this year? Dear listeners, I apologize for leaving you in the lurch, so to speak, about my survival in the graveyard. As you may have expected, the townsfolk of Ester Springs had no intention of killing us. Not yet, anyway. It was this dread of harm, though, that they wanted to instill in our hearts, which makes me still hate and worry towards them to this day. Perhaps more so once I was able to hear the story of the woman I met in the depths of that underground maze. The second incident. Child of Light. I grew up in a town quite like this one. Funny thing, when I came here, I was surprised how much it reminded me of home. The same sounds, the same sorts of people. I guess everything eventually starts to blend together after a while. I didn't have any sort of power, if that's what you want to call it, when I was young. In fact, everything that could be considered a miracle in my life happened only recently. I had come to Ester Springs to visit my mother, a promise I'd made years ago that I was continuously breaking, but the excuses had all run out, and so I found myself sitting on a bus bound for this little town. Ester Springs has always been small, and I never really understood why Mama wanted to live here. She claimed that it was a place that made her feel safe compared to the bustling city that I was familiar with, but it's not like she had friends or even family here. This place is a stranger to her as much as it is to me. But then again, Mama also never truly met a stranger. She could walk up to anyone and get them to tell her their whole story. When I arrived, I found her doing just that on the pews of the local church. Father Drusilla had just finished giving a sermon, and she was praising his speech abilities when I walked in the door. I must have looked so different to these quaint folk. A city girl with hoop earrings and ripped jeans, tattoos on my arms, and a belly button piercing. Probably the most scandalous thing they've seen for generations. Lydia paused to give me a laugh. I could tell it pained her to recant this story, but she did her best to stay focused. Mama immediately introduced me to everyone, and I started to feel welcome. I've never been overly religious despite my Catholic upbringing, but I didn't want to cause a fuss in front of them. Father Drew said I was always free to return any time. They seemed pleasant enough. It's amazing, though, how things can change so swiftly. I only intended to stay for a short weekend. I had work to get back to in the city, and Mama simply wanted to share a Christmas together. I guess I failed to mention that little detail, but I suppose it's no surprise. Holidays are important. I knew that was why I had to come. Plus, I needed to tell her something important. I wish I could remember what it was. Lydia started to look towards a crawling rodent that scurried through the mausoleum tunnel as we sat and talked, and she commented, "It was not long after that. Something strange happened. Mama went to church that Sunday, but I stayed home because I wasn't feeling good. I didn't want to tell her, but my body was on fire. It wouldn't stop hurting no matter what I did. It had been that way since I entered town. This overwhelming pain coursing through my body. It was not physical either. It was everything combined. I couldn't stop it. And I had tried the days leading up to that. Mama didn't know it, but that Saturday, I had seen the doctor while she was out running errands. He gave me all the tests a small-town doc could afford. Nothing major, but it was his professional opinion something more than just physical ailments was afflicting. He urged me to seek guidance at the church. When Mama came back, we did that. But not because I wanted to. I actually passed out from a fever, and she took me to the church immediately. Deacon Haverson was doing the midday services at the moment, and when we met, I could tell it. Immediately, he was not a pure man. Call it an aura about him, but I could sense it. I told her I knew what she meant. As a medium, I have often felt energies that surround people, either negative or positive. And the deacon was certainly on the first part of that spectrum. Our current circumstances were evidence of that. He tried to offer holy water and pray over me. But what happened likely frightened everyone in the congregation. The water burned my skin. It was like fire. I could hardly stop screaming. But then just as suddenly as it had happened, my body healed itself. I couldn't explain it, and neither could they. Haverson called it a sign that I was sent from God and told Mama I needed to be baptized immediately to save me. He claimed some evil spirit was trying to take control, to take root in my heart. But I was scared. If a single cup of water would do that to me, I didn't want to find out what a bathtub did. She shivered as she remembered the next traumatic event. They held me down, forced me to take their sacrament. They wanted me to be a part of their congregation as soon as they realized I had a gift from God. I could feel the water entering my lungs. I wanted to scream. But all I could do was flail and thrash, trying to fight. It didn't work. The baptism was short, but those few moments will be scarred in my mind forever. Even worse for the fact that my own mother stood by and watched as it happened. She approved of it. We need to recognize God's hand and use your gifts for our own. This place has been rife with tragedy lately, and it seems that your arrival is our sign of good things. Deacon Haverson stated solemnly. Churchgoers were always asking for forgiveness for what they had just done. It was empty prayers, but even my mother joined in. The hypocrisy of it all stunned me. I wished that I could use whatever strange power I'd been given and strike them down. Instead, I was placed in chains and locked away. Deacon Haverson claimed it was to keep evil spirits away from me. But that was at least a year ago. And now they only use me like some sort of tool to be trotted out for illnesses and to line the church coffers. I hate them. I hate them all, but I hate Haverson the most. I'm not sure if I'll ever be able to leave Esther Springs alive. As she finished the story, my heart broke for this young girl. I'd seen her aura when I first laid eyes on her, and even though I didn't fully understand it, I wanted to help. Unfortunately, as a medium, my gifts only go so far, and nothing could compare to the will of this maniac congregation. It was clear to me that Deacon Haverson had taken charge of them, brainwashed them into believing that getting their wishes by any means necessary was the only path to restoring Esther Springs. But as a result, this poor, fragile woman had been scarred to her very core. It pained and petrified me to even imagine going through any of that. I had to find a way to give her freedom. We traversed the tunnels for days, it seemed, trying to find an exit, and when we finally did, Lydia warned me this was the same prison where the church had kept her. It reminded me of an old basement with nothing more than shelves of dusty supplies, a few rusted doors that were bolted and led nowhere. So from here the church will anticipate trying to do you more harm, I realized as she sat down and coughed up some bloody mucus. I apologize for my health. The more I use my gift, the more I feel like my power is draining from me. Another wrinkle in this tale. Her supposed divine powers were sapping her of strength, something I knew Haverson wouldn't care about. They'll use you until you've completely shriveled up, I realized. I couldn't allow that. But I still had no way of knowing for sure where her powers had come from. We gotta press forward despite the danger. Maybe under the cover of the next nightfall I can take you to my rooming at the Grouse, I suggested as I peered towards the clock on the wall. It looked like it was still working despite the age. And so, we waited. When darkness finally came, I guided her towards the stairs. The church was empty, and I suspected Haverson probably had assumed that we would remain lost for a little while longer as we dashed to the exit. It wasn't meant to be. As we got past the threshold, Lydia lurched backwards as though in pain and collapsed unconscious. I heard a howl from the night across the woods that surrounded the small town, and then looked up to see Haverson entering. Ah, I was hoping we could get the chance to speak again. I think it's time that you saw why our town is going to such extremes when it comes to the girl. She has a name, I pointed out. But his self-assured attitude was gone, replaced with fear as I heard a loud howl again, and felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Esther Springs was once again proving to be no ordinary home for the holidays. Working the holidays has been something of a tradition of mine over the past few years. I don't have family that I need to run home to, and the pay is really not that bad, all things considered. Plus, best of all, typically most people don't call us this time of year. Sure, there's the occasional drunk driver or something, but the most part we have a small office party where we chill without too much stress. This year I didn't anticipate much to be different. There were about 6 of us handling incoming calls on Christmas Eve, and it looked like cold weather would be hitting the area soon, so we did anticipate a few calls from stranded motorists, maybe the occasional ice slide or something like that. Marty, our shift manager, bought us all Domino's pizza and Coca-Cola. I popped on my headset, waited for the calls to come in. First few hours were mundane, just as I expected. I'm not going to bore you with the details. Let's skip forward to about 1500 in the evening. This call came in about that time. I remember because I had just come back from break. There were only 5 of us left. I think somebody had to drive for a while, and the weather was getting worse. The calls began to increase. And then I pick up the receiver. I talk to an old lady, probably in her late 90s. I'm just saying, that to be fair. Hello? Is this Daniel? She asked in a confused voice. For a split second, I was tempted to promptly tell her that she had the wrong number, but training kicked in, and I realized she might be suffering from dementia. She might be in need of aid. This is 911, ma'am. Are you in need of assistance? Can you provide your address? I asked. Daniel, I'm trying to set up the Christmas tree. Darn thing keeps tipping over, she mumbled. They heard cats in the background and something that sounded like pots banging together. I see. Is anyone else there with you, ma'am? I asked slowly as I typed up a short response on my computer. I didn't expect this to be a lengthy call at all. You were supposed to be here, and you never came, she said, in a harsher tone than I expected. How will I ever explain to the children you weren't here to open presents? She whispered. So there are children in the house, I asked. Not yet, but they will come. They always do, the woman replied cryptically. In the background, I heard what sounded like a man laughing. So there is someone there with you, I repeated my first question, to which I heard her shuffle her feet and mutter something. That was the TV. Why are you asking so many questions? Are you coming to help me with the tree or not? She barked. This line is for emergencies only. I hate to say that Christmas tree alignment is in our department, I told her, and added, you should try to call Daniel tomorrow. Get some rest tonight, okay, ma'am? I noticed that for some reason the call wasn't being picked up on our maps. The signal kept bouncing around in the rurals, making the likelihood of me being able to send officers out for a wellness check very unlikely. There was a short silence, as though she was processing my words. Then she whispered, But if you go, who's going to help me? The presents aren't even finished yet. This will be the worst Christmas ever. I sighed and tried to be patient with her. Already my phone was buzzing with other calls, and I had to move on. I'm sure it will be fine. Didn't you say that there were going to be children coming by? They won't care about the wrappings as much, just the gifts, and, of course, being with you, I commented. The gifts have to be ready before they come. Have you forgotten everything, Daniel? She barked back. Then I heard the doorbell ring in the background. There they are. No, I'm not ready, she mumbled. There was a few confusing sounds, and the line went dead. I sat there for a few moments, a bit perplexed by the incident, and then finished up the short report, and I tried to move on. Once I got a short break, I turned to my coworker Matt and said, "Any crazy calls tonight?" "If you, are we taking score?" he asked me with a smirk. "Just trying to figure out this one I got. Just old lady sounded like she had dementia. Couldn't pinpoint her call, though." Matt looked at me weirdly. "Wait, did she mention something about a Christmas tree? A man named Daniel?" he asked. "Yeah. Oh my God, you got her too?" "Last year. Listen, I know this sounds weird, but next time she calls, just hang up," he told me. "Wait, what? Is she some kind of troublemaker?" I asked. Before he could respond, the next call came in, and I turned back to my desk. 911, what is your emergency?" "Daniel, the Christmas tree is all decorated now. I don't have any gifts for the children, though." I sighed and remembered what Matt had told me, but didn't want to be rude. As gently as I could, I told her that she was mistaken and she had the wrong number. "If you leave me now, I don't think the children will like it," she whispered back. That sounded odd, so I asked, "I thought they already came by." "I told them the gifts weren't ready, so they gave me more time. But I lied. I don't have anything. They'll know I'm lying." "Ma'am, you aren't making any sense. Who are these children?" "I don't know, damn it! Daniel, you've seen them. Their horrible faces and their razor-sharp teeth. They come every year. I just don't have the energy to stop them this time." I leaned forward, hearing the man laughing in the background again, and I asked, "Ma'am, are you trying to say you're in danger? If so, just respond with the phrase, 'I need more time,' okay?" There was silence again, and the sound of scratching. It was either on the door or under her feet. "I need more time," she whispered back. And the line went dead. Taking my headphones off, I quickly sent a transcript of the call to Marty and messaged him to come over to my station. "What's up, Gail?" he said, glancing at the screen. "Is there any way we could figure out where this call is coming from? I think this elderly woman needs help immediately." "It might be difficult. I reviewed the call, though. There isn't much to be going on," he told me. "But something isn't right. Matt said that she called every year. Apparently these kids harass her. They might be taking advantage of her mental illness," I told him. "Yeah, well, I'll see what I can do," he promised. As he walked away, Matt swiveled his chair toward me. "Don't tell me you're still talking to that woman," he said. "Doesn't it strike you as odd she calls in regularly on Christmas?" I asked. "All I know is when she called me, it freaked me out. First she started talking about Daniel, then she wasn't making sense at all. Frightened me, to be honest," he said. "And you just chalked it up to what, madness?" "Gail, who knows? Clearly she isn't in any danger if she's doing it again, so don't let it get to you. You forget the whole thing." But that didn't happen because 20 minutes later, she called again. This time when she called me Daniel, I corrected her. "Oh, that's right. Daniel's dead, isn't he? He was a good boy. Always did what he was told. Helped me a lot around the holidays." I was beginning to form the picture that this Daniel probably also died around this time of year. Maybe that was why the holidays were harder for her. "How did he die?" I asked her. "Same way they all die, I suppose." There was a lump in my throat because of her response. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to explain what you mean by that." "I told you before, I don't have gifts to give them. I had to give them something." "So you let them have Daniel?" She didn't respond. Instead, I heard the strange scratching again and the laughter. "What am I supposed to do? They won't leave me alone." "I need an address. I'll send someone out there." "You can't come. They'll just kill you." "Please, let me help you." "Only Daniel could help me, and he's gone now." gone forever. The scratching was growing louder, and so was the laughter. I realized it sounded like children playing. Then let me be Daniel for you. I can be Daniel. I wasn't sure if what I was saying made sense to her, but after another moment of silence, she said, "You would do that for me?" I told her yes, and finally got an address. "Now I need you to stay on the line with me. I'm going to get professionals there as soon as possible." Suddenly, she screamed like she was being attacked. "What's going on? Is someone else there?" I asked. The laughter was drowning out her screams as I heard the children excitedly crying out. And then I heard awful sounds like they were the ones hurting this poor woman. I snapped my fingers to Matt excitedly and jotted a quick sticky note for him to tell the dispatchers to book it. Despite his misgivings from earlier, he obeyed my instructions. "Ma'am, are you okay? I can't hear anything. What's going on?" I asked. The screams were making my ears hurt. And then just when I thought I couldn't take any more, the line went dead. I tried to reconnect, but suddenly the line was out of service. Whatever was going on here, I was in the dark. I didn't find out much until the paramedics returned. Marty called me into his office. "Well, what did you learn? Was the woman okay?" I asked. "I'm not sure what kind of prank this was, Gail, but it was weird. It was a long drive out there for nothing." For nothing? What do you mean?" "The address you gave us was a smoldering pile of ash. Old fire, probably from 3 or 4 years ago. Nothing but debris. Certainly no woman," paramedic told. "Well, that's impossible. I talked to her only an hour ago. Maybe she gave the wrong address," I asked. "Who knows? Looks like it was pretty bad, though. Several small corpses inside, too. Might have been children's home, something back in the day. Children." It lined up with what I'd heard. Had I been talking to a ghost? Thanks for at least checking it out," I told him. I returned to my desk and told Matt what had happened. "Not surprised. It was a prank. Something doesn't feel right about it, though. I can't put my finger on it," I admitted as I placed my headset back on and started taking calls again. 911, what's your emergency?" No response. Then I heard heavy breathing, like someone was struggling to get words out. "Daniel, you didn't come." A chill ran down my spine as I became filled with dread. It sounded like she was dying, or perhaps she was already dead. "What happened?" I whispered. "I stopped them. All of them. They're dead now, and so am I. Maybe I can protect others from their evil this way," she asked, as I heard her cough and vomit. "You burned your house?" I said. "Won't be long before I'm forgotten. So these wicked little creatures will be gone too. All of them back down to hell." She coughed again, her voice becoming weaker. "Why did they do this? What do they want?" The line went dead again, and I realized it was the end of my shift. I grabbed my keys and decided to take a drive out there and find out the truth for myself. It took almost half an hour, and the weather was more brutal than I expected, but when I made it, the image was not exactly what the paramedics had claimed. There was no fire, just a quaint little house that was remote from anything else in these woods. Instead, it reminded me of the storybook workshop you might see at A Christmas Tale, to be honest. I parked my car and zipped up my coat, walking to the door and knocking loudly. I could hear children inside. An old woman that looked like she had come off of a Norman Rockwell painting came to the door. She appeared to be blind and crippled. "Who is it at this hour?" "It's Daniel," I lied, as I peeked inside the house. It was dark. I could faintly see a Christmas tree and some food on the table, and I kept hearing laughter. "Oh dear, please come in. I waited for you." I followed her into the cramped corridor toward the tree. Something smelled awful, like a rotting corpse was hiding under the spruce. "Do your lights not work?" I asked as I felt the children get uncomfortably close to me. Their hands felt dirty and old. "Hush now. We need to begin our festival," the old woman told me. Then she lit a match. I opened my mouth to ask what she was doing, but then tossed the match into the Christmas tree, igniting it in seconds. As the flame blazed, the room around me became clear. All of her children, if you could even call them that, were naked and resembled old men, growling and snarling as they began to attack me with jagged teeth and twisted nails. The old woman laughed madly, and I saw an older man in the background, his belly carved out, probably from a previous meal given to these little demons. I managed to pull myself up and push the tree down, the mighty spruce hitting the old woman harshly before I dashed towards the door. The demon children were right behind me, cackling like wild animals as the fire spread. I made it back to my car and watched as the tiny home went up in a blaze, fulfilling the words that my coworker had claimed they saw. I made sure none of those awful lads made it out of the home, and sat there gasping for breath in the cold as the fire died down until only ash was left. I cranked up my car and called it a night, my body still numb to the entire experience. The day after, I had a morning shift, and some of my coworkers were asking about the call, but I didn't want to even bother to recall the incident. I sat down tiredly beside another dispatcher, saying a prayer that the nightmare would end. Then I heard them answer their phone and repeat what I had said to the old woman the night before. Snatching the headset off, I disconnected the call before they got roped in as well. "What was that about?" they asked. "If that lady calls again, don't answer." I paused and realized that would likely mean that others in the office would be in danger too. "Tell anyone if a woman calls asking for Daniel, forward that call to me," I ordered. I sat back against my chair, skin bristling with pain as I waited for the call. I'll just have to make it past the holidays. Then she'll stop. Until next year. Dear friends, I hope that the term I use doesn't cause you any concern. Some would likely not want a pagan medium as a friend, and if so, I don't wish any harm on them. It's just that at this point, I feel like I've grown close to my audience, to the point that I worry for their safety. What happens to me over the holidays has left my faith in humanity shaken. Discovering the wicked deeds that self-proclaimed men of cloth performed with the backing of their devout followers. It's made me question if I can even truly have a home for the holidays again, especially as I draw close to the truth about the horrible secrets this town hides. Every new story tells of a darkness that's boiled up from hell itself, I feel, and nothing could prove this more than what the deacon told me about the gifts he had seen young Lydia carried. As I listened, I understood some part of his own journey, whether I consider his behavior to be righteous or not, and I am not one to judge others. I must make that clear. I feel that the actions can easily allow justice to fall where it is suited. The third incident. Holy Shadows. "It's time you heard of what happened to Father Drusilla," the deacon said as his altar boys hastily locked the doors and windows of the church. They carried Lydia towards a small pew in the front where the choir often performed, and Haverson was putting out the candles, making the room pitch dark. The howling of the woods continued, made my entire body shake. "The girl began to display her gift on that first day coming into the church. Has she told you this?" "She told me how you forced her into a baptism," I commented softly. "And rightfully so, given what happened next. As we discovered, her body was filled with spirits, demonic presence that was trying to use her as a vessel for this world," Haverson said. "That same demon now walks in these woods. It's been attacking the people of our small town, trying to drag them to hell. Father Drew found out about it a few nights before your arrival. We were having a mass here, helping people in town to gain healing from Lydia when he returned from his mission. He came to the church foyer covered in blood and spouting nonsense. Immediately I ordered 2 of the altar boys to help him stand upright, get him on the stage. The entire congregation needed to hear of what had happened. His eyes were wild, his body hardly able to maintain his own weight as I gave him some water and allowed him to eat sacrament. He had nearly calmed down, but then he saw Lydia, there in the front pews. She had fallen into a coma. Often this happens whenever she's exhausted her gifts a bit too much, and I had advised the church that this is a sign from God, that he is resting his hands the same way he does upon the Sabbath. But when Father Drew saw her, he screamed. Tried to curse her, to be honest. It was a striking proclamation coming from this holy man, but then he calmed down again and explained what was wrong. He told us that he could sense that the girl had recently gone into the land of spirits. How, I can't tell you, but Father Drew has never been wrong about this before. As proof of this, he told us of the shadows that lurked in the woods, claimed they came from the girl herself. When she sleeps, the shadows move around and devour holiness. He even called them agents of the devil. The wounds he sustained were from these monsters, and he warned if we didn't act quickly, the entire town would be in danger. Seeing as so many of us had seen our first miracle, we were having a test of faith. And some even recommended stoning Lydia. It was my decision to lock her away. Her gift is too powerful to simply be tossed aside because of the darkness that rests in her. I mulled over what he told me, watching as the strange shadows moved on the exterior of the church. They don't come on holy land. It's safe here. So it is for everyone. But the town, are they all informed? I asked. He bit his bottom lip. It's sometimes better to keep a predator fed, he whispered. Even the devil has a role to play. I had my disgust, instead opting to find out more about this creature if I could. I think Father Drew died of his injuries. The deacon, however, no longer seemed interested in sharing the stories to me. Instead, some that took the church as shelter were asking how they could protect themselves from the beast at the door. Haverson suddenly changed his friendly to dangerous. The reason I tell you all this is because I want to prove to my congregation that you are a child of God. It is true the beast will not harm you, and you'll be able to walk through our streets untouched. However, we're risking everything by allowing you to keep living if you're in fact a spawn of Satan. Suddenly, several grown men were pushing me to the door. The howling was becoming more intense, and I was being shoved into the open air. Deacon Haverson shouted out, "Believe in the Lord and his powers will save you from the jaws of death. Let this test of faith prove your validity as the saint and not a witch." I could feel the air around me beginning to grow colder as I pushed back towards the door, but the men had already kicked me out. They were determined to follow this dark ritual to its bitter end, even if it meant my life was in danger. It occurred to me that Father Drew was likely fed to the beast for a similar reason. The church were certain that keeping Lydia alive was more vital than stopping this hell beast, and my death would only encourage them to keep their sick fantasy of being blessed perpetrated even further. I moved towards the outer gardens, listening and watching to see what the shadows would do. Every whisper in the air made my hair stand on edge, and I closed my eyes to focus, use my gifts that they thought were from the devil, and find this beast. It didn't take long. As the unseen became a reality to me, I realized the creature stood at the edge of the church's grounds. It was surprisingly small compared to the images I had conjured up, a living shadow that did not enter holy ground. I approached it slowly, trying to get a better grasp on what it was and where it had come from. It was like looking at a dark reflection of Lydia, and the aura around the being told me that this alter self was embodying her desires, her anger, her fears. I offered my hand to it, hoping that it would understand I meant no harm. In response, it showed me the reality of what had happened to Father Drew. Smoke filled my mind, and pictures formed around me as time seemed to reverse itself. Flashing images of the deacon and his faithful came up as they dragged Father Drew out of his own church. I screamed. It was Lydia. She wanted to protect him. Instead, the church was insisting that he be done away with. He wants to end our miracle. But we have come too far to stop now. We are blessed to have this day, this season of mirth, and no one shall stop us, Deacon Haverson proclaimed. They broke his skull right at the edge of the church grounds, hoping the shadow beast would eat up what remained. Father Drew had suggested they exorcise the demons from Lydia, save her immortal soul. In response to the thought of losing their precious little slave, the church turned on him, hoping the devil would see fit to tear him apart. What happened next? Show me, I demanded the shadow. In response, it ran into town, whisking its way between buildings. I chased after it. I didn't even dare to imagine if Haverson or his worshippers were following. It was leading me to a large banquet hall that appeared abandoned. Inside, I saw a massive Christmas tree, decked out with all sorts of ornaments, but it was immediately clear it hadn't been used in quite some time. The shadow crept across the floor to the stairs, guiding me downward. As I approached the steps, I felt my stomach lurch. Since my arrival, I had searched for an answer to what's causing this here, in this tranquil town. I knew as I descended to the basement of this once festive building, I was about to come face to face with the answer. There was a presence here. And for once, I realized Deacon Haverson was correct. I felt no aura, no sense of the spiritual world. Just a dark, endless void. And it beckoned me to come and see its glory. My friends, I know that many of you have a hard time believing in the supernatural because it's never touched your life. I will accept your skepticism when I tell you about the powers I was born with and the journey it's led me on. Often I found myself somewhere that I do not belong, surrounded by people that remind me of the worst about humanity. Esther Springs was worse than most. Here, a devout group of Christians turned from their values in search of miracles they felt they deserved. Their selfishness blackened their hearts. But I soon found out there was more to the story. A secret that the town was hiding that would unravel everything. A holiday horror that has made me re-question everything I thought I knew about our hearts, our free will, and our very existence on this planet. But you may wish to suspend your disbelief about this discovery for your sanity, and if so, I understand. Mine left me probably long ago. But only truth keeps me alive. The fourth incident. The burning basement holly. Stepping into the dark, narrow stairwell that led to the banquet hall basement sent a chill down my spine. I knew there was something dangerous here, a presence that had caused so much harm already to this town. Deacon Haverson had called it a demon, and I was beginning to think he might be right as I reached the bottom step. Stepping into the dark, narrow stairwell that led to the banquet hall basement sent a chill down my spine. I knew there was something dangerous here, a presence that had caused so much harm already to this town. Deacon Haverson had called it a demon, and I was beginning to think he might be right as I reached the bottom step. The floor was cold, but that wasn't the right word for it. It actually felt like dead skin, numb and devoid of all life, forgotten, abandoned. But not because there hadn't been anyone here in a while. There were signs of a festive party almost everywhere I looked. Presents on the floor scattered about, tinsel and mistletoe, everything designed to make the basement appear colorful and lively. But the colors seemed to be drained from every part of the room, except one. A bright red door near the west wall, sticking out like a sore thumb. I approached the door cautiously, listening to the seething whispers of the shadow I had been chasing. It wanted me to see what was behind the door. It was begging me to open it. Then I heard a voice from the steps behind me. I wouldn't do that. The last person to touch that door had their hand burned clean off. Before turning to see who had spoken, I got a little closer to examine the frame for myself. In the dim light, I could see the scorched marks against the wood, evidence of exactly what I had just been told. Something inexplicable had happened here. I turned towards the steps, surprised to see a familiar face standing there. I came here to Esther Springs at the behest of a colleague. Something that in my profession is admittedly very rare. It's probably best to pause now and explain my relationship to the medium that was there in the basement. Jay Crawley was a little older than me by a few months, but knew the way to talk to spirits far better. He said for him, it had happened first in childhood, and given what I had seen him accomplish, I believed it. Jay had performed exorcisms, seances, even managed to enter the spirit realm and return, a feat that I still wasn't sure I was ready to accomplish. Seeing him here in Esther Springs was the confirmation I needed that my mission wasn't in vain. His presence in this basement told me that he'd had to hide from the supposed Christians that called this place home. I was beginning to think that you weren't going to show up. Jay said. This wasn't the time for friendly chit-chat. I needed answers. Tell me what happened here, I demanded, gesturing towards the door. Jay smirked and walked towards the door, keeping a close distance from it as he explained. Now that's the medium I know. Getting down to business. There's a holiday party here almost every year. Right after Thanksgiving, they want to get into the spirit of things. Esther Springs has always been some of the biggest, most elaborate festivities, if you ask me. The year I truly think they intended to top everything that they had ever done before. This banquet hall was going to be filled to the brim with guests. And the bed and breakfast, too. Guess you could say, for a sleepy little town, they depend on the holidays. Too many tourists come and go. Anyway, like any other little town, they have their traditions. Things that got started for reasons that people forgot about. One involved the basement, I think. As long ago, maybe this door used to go to a tornado shelter. Or maybe it was some kind of tunneling system. Either way, it was a plan that never got finished because the door was defunct. It led nowhere except to an empty hole in the wall. Not even big enough for a broom closet. As you might have guessed, for a town that wants to go all out to impress people during the holidays, this basement couldn't be the exception. So, there were a few members of the church that would make the most beautiful holly wreath you'd ever seen every year. And they would hang it right here on the door. This year, when they did, an unexpected phenomenon happened. An ethereal fire burnt right into the holly and knocked the item off the door. Their hard work turned into a crisp in mere seconds, Jay said as he approached the door. He showed me the wreath. It was a black husk now, still warm to the touch. This is the starting point of Esther Springs descending towards hell, I think, he said as he reached for the handle. I stopped him just as he was about to turn it. I thought you said it was dangerous. I thought you said that it didn't lead anywhere. Very observant. I kept my head down since I got here, waiting for your arrival. Unfortunately for you, though, the damage had already been done. He opened the door, and I held my breath. Have you ever had one of those moments where you felt like you could be knocked off of your feet? The wind kicked out of your lungs. The world was spinning as the door opened, and I felt this overwhelming urge to vomit. Jay kept me steady, and we peered to the other side. There wasn't an empty hole anymore. Instead, we could make out a massive stairwell, leading far into the heavens. Much larger than the building we were in was capable of, and each and every step of the stairs was completely blood red. This was a gateway into the spirit realm, I realized, as I took a tentative step forward. Everyone that's gone into this place has returned different. Lydia was the first, and after that, this town, it's never been the same. She never told me. Did something block her memories? I asked. I have no idea, but I know what led you here. Same evil I've sensed for days now. Nauseating. The members of the church are listening to its calling. No idea what its end goal must be. It can't be good. I can protect myself from harm and go in. My gift is strong, I told him. I wasn't entirely confident in that statement, but I wasn't about to sit here and do nothing when the truth was right there in front of me. I was afraid to say that, he admitted. Jay, you need to wait here. I might need your help to resurface, I told him. This thing could consume your soul, he whispered. I closed my eyes and listened to the darkness for a moment. It was hungry, but not towards me. This city was its target. I needed to know why. And let's hope for one more Christmas miracle. The town of Christian Springs was big enough to justify having its own cold storage, but far too small to make proper use of it. On average, I would end up seeing about 5 bodies a month, most of them overdosed from the smaller towns nearby. The town of Christian Springs was big enough to justify having its own cold storage, but far too small to make proper use of it. On average, I would end up seeing about 5 bodies a month, most of them overdoses from the smaller towns nearby. My work at the morgue was quick and impersonal. No one that I could recognize ever ended up on my table, and the toxicology reports always came back with a clear-cut case of death, usually something in the realm of opioids. What I saw in that fluorescent-lit room always stayed where it belonged. My work life and my family life were always 2 separate entities. That all changed during the Christmas season of 2003. 2 local bodies were brought in within 24 hours of each other. Neither of them were like anything I had ever seen. The first body once belonged to Chelsea Steeler, a local first grader. After school let out for winter break, Steeler walked off the premises only to return a couple minutes later, bleeding from her mouth. Steeler stumbled through the school's playground, begging for help, and then collapsed. She was pronounced dead soon as emergency services arrived. The second body I recognized, Christine Morgan. Morgan was someone that most people in Christian Spring community would recognize. She was the crazy religious lady. As the name of the town might imply, we have our own fair share of Bible thumpers in town, but Morgan's breed of spirituality was considerably more aggressive than anything you could find being peddled by the televangelists that the locals watched. Both the cinemas in Christian Springs banned the woman from their premises on account of her interrupting screenings of even the most milquetoast of movies with her raving sermons. When the local museum set up a dinosaur exhibit, Morgan was banned from there too. To her, dinosaur bones were the work of Satan, created to lead the true believers astray. It was Christine Morgan's daughter, 7-year-old Grace Morgan, who discovered the body. When I first heard this bit of information, I found myself pitying the child. My ruminations about Grace Morgan's well-being were soon whisked away by what I discovered during the autopsies. Both of the bodies exhibited internal damage, the likes of which I had never seen or read about before. Their stomach lining was shredded to bits. Chunks of their liver were found inside of their esophagus. Every internal organ that was still intact showed signs of extreme scarring. It was as if something had torn them up from the inside. The cause of death was a complete mystery. Aside from a shared geographical location, the two women had nothing in common, yet the severity of their injuries was almost identical. It was as if someone had planted bombs inside of them and set tiny bits of shrapnel flying through their organs, yet there was no shrapnel to be found. There were no clear trace of instrument that had killed these women. On closer observation, however, I found something else that connected the two bodies. In the confounding mess of viscera, I found something that made their cause of death seem quaint by comparison. Even though they were bloodied and covered in loose chunks of flesh and membrane, I immediately knew what I held in my hands. I was holding 2 tiny gingerbread men. They were small, both fitting into the palm of my glove, but they still inspired fear. Unlike the big-eyed, smiling gingerbread men that we sold at the local bakeries, the creations I held in my hand had tiny slits for eyes, and their mouths were stretched into long, harrowed screams that descended well into their torsos. The baked goods I held in my hand were the product of a disturbed mind. I called just about everyone I went to school with. From the few colleagues that picked up, I couldn't find anyone who was willing to drive over and take a look at my findings. Everyone was either far too busy dealing with their personal aspects of the holiday season, or were swamped with the suicide spike that Christmas brings. Even past their business, no one believed me. When I described the 2 foreign objects I found lodged in the bodies, a couple of my old classmates even inquired whether I was sober. Not being able to find any explanation through my informal channels, I called my boss on the county level. His annoyance with my phone call was crystal clear. The town of Christian Springs was not on his radar, and in his opinion, mysteries that weren't directly connected to criminal investigations were better left unexplored. After a long back and forth, he agreed to drive down and investigate the gingerbread men as soon as his schedule cleared up. He suggested that I shouldn't go into detail on my report if I didn't want to undergo a psychological evaluation. I filled out my report as best I could, but the cause of death still ended up as unknown. After a couple more phone calls to the old colleagues who didn't pick up the first time around, I gave up. The mystery of the gingerbread men would have to wait until after the holidays. I placed the cookie creatures face down in a glass jar, put on my coat, and drove back home. My wife didn't like me talking about work at home. In fact, she didn't like me talking about work at all. Whenever the question of what I did for a living came up at dinner parties, she quickly said that I worked with the police, or call me a doctor, and then quickly changed the topic. When I came home that evening, I didn't mention anything about the gingerbread men, but all night long, those slitted eyes haunted me. I dreamed my son walking into our bedroom in the middle of the night, clutching his stomach. I dreamed of my wife getting up to comfort him, but kneeling over in pain as well. I dreamed of my family lying in those metal slabs, me cutting their chests open, finding nothing but pink mush where their organs should be. When I woke up that morning, I was overjoyed to find my wife sleeping next to me, unharmed by the baked monstrosities that tore through my sleep. But the joy didn't last long. My family might have been alive, but those two gingerbread men were still real. They were still waiting for me in the examination room. During breakfast, my son excitedly told me about his last day of school. I knew he went on a field trip to the museum. I signed the permission slip for it after all. But all my son could talk about was the gingerbread men his class made in the morning. I kept on trying to ask him what his favorite dinosaur exhibit was. But all my son could talk about was his newfound interest in baking. The house phone rang. My wife picked it up. Whatever was being said on the other line made her visibly uncomfortable. But when she came back to the table, she simply resumed eating. It wasn't until my son went outside to play with his friends, she told me the school called. One of my son's classmates suddenly died. The teachers were calling the parents to let them know. Chelsea Steeler? I asked. She immediately noticed the beginning of a conversation she didn't want to have. Let's not tell him until after Christmas. Let him be a kid for a little longer. I didn't argue. I didn't share the details of what I found inside of Steeler's body. Instead, I told my wife that there was some last-minute paperwork I had to take care of on the examination room before I fully clocked out for the holidays. It wasn't entirely a lie. I did spend some time going through the autopsy report, making sure it didn't sound completely mad. But it wasn't the reason I drove back to work that day. My real reasons were lying face down in a glass jar. Yet when I took the jar out, the gingerbread men weren't lying down. They were pressed against the glass, facing the outside world. But there was no doubt in my mind the creatures had shifted. They had somehow stood up in my absence and were looking out into the world with their slitted eyes. For a moment I stood there, confounded by the blood-covered baked goods staring back at me. Yet the longer I stood in the empty examination room, the more I thought about my family. Beyond the corpses, beyond the ripped-up muscle and flesh, I had a family. Back home, my wife and son were waiting for me. I closed the cupboard that held the gingerbread men, shut off the lights, and drove back home. It was difficult to keep the malformed creatures out of my head on the drive back. But as soon as I got past my front door, the mysteries of my professional life dissipated beneath the sheer pleasure of spending time with my family. After lunch, the three of us went outside to build a snowman. 2 big eyes of Christmas ornaments, a thick carrot nose, and a wide grin of coal. The creature that my son had constructed wiped away any memory of the harrowing gingerbread men in the examination room. Once the snowman in our front yard had been completed and the sun had set, the three of us settled down on the couch and watched a Christmas movie. I scarcely paid attention to what was on the television. Whatever was on the screen was irrelevant. Just a big backdrop to a calm evening spent with those that I loved. It wasn't until my wife and I were falling asleep I thought about my work again. Just as she drifted off to sleep, she mentioned we should have a talk with our son about bullying. While I was off finishing my paperwork, my son told my wife about one of his classmates tormenting the daughter of the weird religious lady. Apparently, the bully had taken the girl's gingerbread man and ate it in front of the whole class, embarrassing the poor girl. Christine Morgan's daughter? I asked. Probably, my wife said, yawning. Was the bully Chelsea Steeler? I asked. I don't know, he didn't use names, she said, yawning again. We should tell him about standing up for the weaker kids. For a moment I thought about breaking the unspoken rule of my marriage and telling my wife about the 2 corpses in the examination room. But that moment dragged on too long. By the time I started to whisper my worries, she was already asleep. My mind was still desperately trying to make connections between the 2 bodies and their gruesome deaths, but I forced my eyes shut and tried to get some rest. I hoped that some sleep would help me forget about the gingerbread men. It didn't. I woke up drenched in sweat with my heart racing. In my dreams, I saw my family sitting in the kitchen making gingerbread men. My wife and son seemed so happy, so full of life, so innocent. Yet the cookies they made shared none of their joy. Slitted eyes and maws of crimson stared back at me from the kitchen table. Slitted eyes that blinked and maws that chomped. Before I could warn them, before I could save my family, the gingerbread man leapt into action. Soon enough, my wife and son were gone. And all that remained of them was blood and mangled skin. Seeing the kitchen clean and free of death brought a tiny bit of calmness to my mind, but I knew that what I truly needed was sleep. With a generous helping of sleeping pills and a nightcap, I returned back to bed. At first, the thoughts of Morgan and Steeler stuck in my mind, but soon enough I fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. I woke up to an empty bed that morning. For a moment, past the chemically induced grogginess of my slumber, I found myself worrying about my family being kidnapped by a group of possessed gingerbread men. Walking down to the kitchen and finding my wife and son safe and sound calmed me somewhat. The calmness didn't last. They were baking gingerbread. Their creations were unlike the ones I had seen in my dreams. The cookie men they made were cheery and happy and full of pep. That didn't matter to me. All I could think about were those slitted eyes and screaming maws. All I could think about were the two gingerbread men standing in my office, waiting. They invited me to join in on the baking, but I busied myself with beer and television. I hoped that alcohol and channel hopping would distract me, yet all I could think about were the bodies. Regardless of how much I drank or how loud the Christmas music blaring from the television was, all I could think about was Morgan, Steeler, and the cookie men that were lodged in their broken corpses. My mind trying to find some semblance of reason in a bewildering world. "Daddy, I made you something." My son's voice cut through my frenzied internal monologue. In his hands, he held a little gingerbread man with a bushy mustache and glasses. The facial hair was made of green frosting, and the glasses were far too big for the man's face, but I could tell that the gingerbread man was meant to be a representation of me. "Do you go to school with Grace Morgan?" I asked him. He seemed confused by the question, but eventually he nodded. "Did Grace ever talk about her mother? Did they get along?" I asked him. "Gracie's mom was mean," my son said. "When the class went to the museum, Gracie's mom was standing outside yelling at us." "But did Grace ever talk about her mother? Do you think Grace would ever want to hurt her? Would Grace ever want to hurt Chelsea Steeler?" "Well, Gracie's mom didn't let her come to the museum with us, and Chelsea was always mean to Gracie," my son said, unsure of my questions. "Do you like this gingerbread man I made you?" I didn't. Even though the cookie held an innocent smile and was made by the most important person in my life, I could barely look at it. Yet, as uncomfortable as I was, the pride in my son's eyes was undeniable. I accepted the cookie. I knew full well that the effigy in my hand was a product of love, but all I could imagine was the little gingerbread man tearing through my insides. "Are you going to eat it, Dad?" he asked. "Promise it's not bad. Mom helped me." I almost told him I wasn't hungry or that I would eat the cookie later, but the pride in my son's eyes was undeniable. The pride in my son's eyes was more important than the fear in the pit of my stomach. In one swift motion, I decapitated the gingerbread man with my teeth. Once I was sure his head was crushed enough not to do me any harm, I drowned the chunks of gingerbread with a gulp of beer. "Tasty," I said. But I wasn't able to mask my discomfort. That evening, as my wife and I wrapped up the Christmas presents, she asked me if I was all right. Both her and my son had noticed that something was bothering me. That evening, she was willing to talk about my problems, be they work-related or not. Yet by then, my fear of the gingerbread men had grown to such an intensity that I couldn't put it into words. I just told her that work has been a bit more stressful than usual this year, but that I would be fine eventually. She asked me if I wanted to talk about it. I didn't. I couldn't. But she tried to get me to open up a couple more times. Eventually, with the lights off and the presents packed beneath the tree, I was left alone with my thoughts. My thoughts were singular. I shouldn't have been driving that night. I had drank enough throughout the day for it to have been a bad idea, and to make things worse, there was a powerful blizzard that swept through the town that Christmas Eve. Yet I knew that unless I got some closure, I wouldn't be able to sleep. I drove through the curtain of snow until I could see the faint lights of the Christian Springs morgue. The absurdity of it all was a steady drum beat in the back of my head, but it wasn't until I was standing in the darkness of my office that I consciously acknowledged how insane my trip was. There was nothing to be achieved from our closer examination. Morgan and Steeler were dead. There was nothing I could do to bring them back. I almost convinced myself to turn around and go back home. Almost. Just as I was about to turn around and walk away, I heard something. I heard the faintest of taps coming from the cupboard in which I kept the gingerbread men. Tap, tap, tap. Like little claws knocking on glass. Tap, tap, tap. Like little gingerbread men trying to make their way out. Tap, tap, tap. With my heart in my throat, I opened the cupboard. Stuck in their glass prison, the two gingerbread men stood there, staring straight at me. They were no longer standing in the spread-out pose in which I first found them. Each of them had one of their blood-caked limbs extended, as if they were about to knock on the glass again. I stared at them, waiting for them to move again, waiting for something to happen that would convince me I had not gone insane. In the dim light of my office, I thought I could see their eyes twitch. I thought I could see the slightest bit of stifled movement in their mouths. But before I could steady myself to properly look, my phone rang. It's my wife. She woke up in the middle of the night to find her husband missing, to find the car missing. She asked two questions. She asked whether I was safe and whether I was having an affair. The implication that I would be capable of being unfaithful hurt me. But as I assured her that I would never break our marriage vows, I realized how far I had let my mind drift. I closed the cupboard, slid down to the floor of the examination room, and told her everything. I told her about Steeler and Morgan's unfathomable internal damage. I told her about the gingerbread men. I told her about how scared I was. She listened patiently. With each word that left my lips, with each part of my insane story that I described, I found myself less and less scared. The cause of death was still a mystery, but the pure act of explaining the gingerbread men theory made it seem inconceivable. The murderous gingerbread men were not real. What was real was my worried wife who was waiting for me at home. Once I was all talked out, she asked me to come home. I did. As I shut off the lights and left the examination room, however, the tiniest bit of doubt slithered into my mind. Tap, tap, tap. I ignored it. Drove back home. The steadily rotating cast of extended family members that came through our house kept me occupied for the next couple of days. All worries of murderous gingerbread men disappeared beneath the fear that my mother-in-law inspired within me. But the fear wasn't something that haunted my dreams. That fear was manageable. When my wife and I decided to tell our son about Chelsea Steeler, he didn't seem overly concerned. Apparently his friends had already told him. Just about everyone from his class knew as soon as the playground rumor mill got going. He just never brought it up because he knew that Mommy didn't like talking about death in the house. Kid seemed pretty comfortable about the concept of mortality, but what can one expect from a child whose father works with the police? A day before New Year's, I got called back into work. Another overdose from a town nearby. The ghastly gingerbread men had left my mind completely by then. I simply co-signed them to a part of some minor mental breakdown, yet when I entered the examination room, the thoughts of those slitted eyes came flooding back. The cupboard was opened. There was broken glass on the floor. The gingerbread men had escaped. The gingerbread men had escaped. I spent most of January sleepless. I kept on thinking that somehow those two strange creatures made of gingerbread would come and they would track me down. It hurt my family and me because I was aware of their existence. They didn't. Life carried on as normal. My boss agreed that Morgan and Steeler's injuries were difficult to explain, but he also insisted that they were not important enough to investigate. After the first day of classes, my son informed me that Grace Morgan left town to go live with her grandparents. and that no one was particularly sad when a school bully disappeared off campus. Once it became clear that no murderous baked goods were coming after me and my family, the thoughts of those slitted-eyed creatures drifted away into the realm of pointless mystery. I still don't understand what I saw the Christmas of 2003, but I have resigned myself to the fact that I'll never understand. Somehow, however, I find myself sitting in a bar after a medical examiner conference, and colleagues start sharing their stories of the bizarre and the unexplained. I tell my tale of the gingerbread man. And sometimes, when the booze is flowing freely and people's tongues loosen, they tell me that I'm not the only coroner who found baked goods inside of a mangled corpse. Once, when I was a child, I visited the land of the dead. There's a door in our garden that only I could see. On the other side, there were people dancing, protecting my family, and sharing stories of days gone by. My parents thought it was a wild fantasy because I was an only child, but my grandmother believed me. I learned about the gift I can now control, seeing the spirits that move between worlds. I guess that's why Christmas is so special to me. It gives me the opportunity to reconnect to my family, even the ones lost to time. I've never been afraid of death or what it might hold for me, but I do recognize there are forces beyond the veil that are more sinister than others. Esther Springs was due to meet one very soon that Christmas, and I was going to be the harbinger of its coming. The final incident. A longing for the gates of heaven. I stepped across the threshold, leaving Jay behind to explore the endless crimson staircase. It was here that Lydia had been given her mysterious gift. I was sure of that. And likely from here, where the dangerous demons that now plagued this sleepy town dwelled. I found myself climbing the bloody staircase and getting nowhere. Yet the more I went, the fainter sounds became. The dimmer the color. Everything was lost into this void. And then I turned and saw a door, bland and forgotten, leading back towards Esther Springs. But this was not the same small town I was familiar with. As I crossed over, I only saw signs of death and destruction, bodies strewn about the basement, carelessly torn apart on the stairs. Beyond the banquet hall, there was more of the same. The entire town looked like it had been struck by a bomb. Houses were torn down, trees burnt to a crisp, not a speck of green anywhere. This was nothing short of oblivion, and the bodies that were piled on the streets and hanging from the trees told of a death toll greater than any natural disaster. It was a ghastly scene for even such a wicked place as this. Amid the devastation, I saw the shadow that had led me here. Lydia standing near the edge of the church grounds. She was singing Christmas carols as I approached and played in ashen snow like a little child, unaware of all that was going on around her. "Lydia! Why are you here? Why did you bring me here?" A voice hardly sounded like my own. It was hollow and echoed everywhere. "I didn't want to have Christmas alone," she answered, as she danced her way into the church. I was shocked to see that the shadow could enter here, almost forgetting where I was. The rules of the Holy Church didn't apply in this void. I stepped inside and caught my breath. I saw the congregation pews were packed. All of the villagers of Esther Springs were there, holding their hymn books, singing as Father Drew finished the morning choir. "Children have been blessed to enter the sacred kingdom of the Lord ahead of the world. Through this door, the one that we feared and turned a blind eye to for years, we have seen how the Lord has given us all. We need to trust him," Drew said. He was talking about the burnt holly, the strange phenomenon that had sparked this whole series of events. "Lydia, you were lost when you came, but the gift that God gave to you brought you to us and gave you an extraordinary power," the preacher proclaimed. "And with that power, you performed works, miracles you hardly understood. Enough to sway the town of Esther Springs, to take faith again. It was that faith we need, for now the final resting is here. We can walk into the gates of heaven. No longer a need for waiting for his salvation. We can go through of our own accord. All it takes brothers and sisters, is a single act of solidarity. Who will join this call? The church cheered, but I felt a dread in my heart as they passed the communion. According to the deacon, Drew had died at the hand of the shadow. He was now eagerly encouraging members of the church to do the same. All I could see in the shadow's eyes were hunger. And then the churchgoers began to cough up blood, to flail, to collapse in the pews. Some of them screamed. Some tried to run. The shadow was fast. I saw more death and destruction everywhere I looked. And then I chose to run back to the banquet hall. I needed to return to the real world and warn them before it was too late. I hardly made it back across the threshold when I saw a body that sent shockwaves across me. In the banquet hall with the first massacre, it was Jay. A sudden chilling revelation sunk into my body. The Jay I had spoken to in the real world was a fraud, a charlatan that had led me here to be trapped. No, I realized I still had a personal connection to this little town. Lydia, I had to find a way to save her soul. I rushed to the door to return to the land of the living, my lungs filling with fire as I realized I had spent far too long here trying to unravel what these demons wanted. The answer was clear. They had latched on to Esther Springs' desire for prominence. Their need for blessings was causing them to make exceptions to the life they led, choices that made no sense. And returning to the real world showed me firsthand how that was happening. The congregation had gathered at the banquet hall. Jay had called them there and was a bit surprised to see my return. They had brought Lydia as well, who was still in a coma. I told him to go to the other side and see what awaited him. What visions of the future did you see? My partner asked. No, I had to remind myself. This is just a poor imitation of the man I knew. The real Jay was dead. Now this ethereal husk was hell-bent on trapping the people of Esther Springs. I thought of what to say. All the ways that I could offer salvation. This town is about to be celebrating the holidays, convinced that the miracles they forced Lydia to perform were proof they had God's backing. They didn't care who they hurt or the damage they'd done. And some of them were already completely under the control of the demonic influence, eager to cause more harm. It made me realize that as much as I wanted to save them, it wasn't possible. And it wasn't what they truly deserved. I pointed toward the door which remained open, the crimson staircase waiting for new souls to rise to heaven. The gates of St. Peter have opened. Father Drew was wrong about Lydia like you first thought. Her gift showed the people of Esther Springs just a glimpse of what would happen in the world beyond. And now you can join Christ in the heavenly glory for once and for all time, I said. And I stood aside. The people eagerly accepted my testimony as I reached for Lydia's hand. But the girl must stay here. She's tainted by the spirits that tried to wreak havoc on her. There can be no gift of salvation for her, I said. The people of Esther Springs entered the doorway, following the staircase to the world beyond. Deacon Haverson was the last to go. You have a pure soul. I hope one day it leads you to the Lord. And then he left. And Lydia and Jay and I were alone. Once he was gone, I let my shoulders slump and proclaimed, "You can drop the act." I saw the slaughter. The fake Jay smiled in that enigmatic way that sent a shiver down my spine. I could see the demon hiding behind his skin. What a blessed holiday you've given us. So many souls for the harvesting. This town's practically empty now, all raptured to our eternal servitude, he whispered. They allowed bitterness and envy and jealousy into their hearts. It was a cruel act not to give them justice, I said. I'd wager you're right, for even the devil has a role in the work of the Lord. How else do you suppose we came here? He whispered, as he tipped his hat and moved towards the door. Care to join us? It was a bold question. I'd lost so much coming here and had little waiting for me, but There were other places out there, far worse than Esther Springs. And I needed to learn more about the darkness that was spreading. Not this year, I said, with a half smile. He accepted my words and closed the door behind him. Then the entire frame burnt up, and Lydia and I were alone. It's been a day now, and I'm not sure whether she'll fully recover from what happened, but I confirmed the healing powers she possessed have waned. The town itself is just an empty shell now, forgotten and barren, and snow is falling to cover it up. I'll likely leave before Lydia can wake up. I need to be home before Christmas and share my story with my family. I do not guess what you may think of me for having been so harsh to the residents of this place. I assume you think me a demon as well. But sometimes, evil must exist, and justice must be met. Otherwise, how can we ever appreciate the good in our lives? Dear listener, you may believe that the holidays are a time of good cheer and mirth, and that every song you sing is one filled with joy. And if you wish to continue thinking that, I suggest you travel somewhere else. Perhaps a story of Santa Claus and good boys and girls drinking eggnog and playing with toys all through the winter solstice. You will not find any fairy tales of happiness here. For every Merry Christmas that exists, there's also one filled with darkness and depression. These are the tales that I've come to offer. You may think you know what it is like to hear such stories, and that you're prepared to listen. But my research has found that often, when we sort through accounts, a deeper, darker understanding of our own reality is found. I'm a historian, and it's my task to understand why certain experiences are retold generation after generation. Only minor details changed here and there. Some become legends. But clearly, there is truth amid all their wounds. And when these people told them to me, I knew it wasn't just for a good scare. They had lived through it. I started with the intention of merely gathering facts, but now I feel compelled to learn more. And I hope that you will do as well. I dare not think that my duty should be anything other than to recount them now to you. The Feast of Souls. It was 1987, near the city that once was called Harbor Bay. It was a feast that many claimed would rival the Passover itself. Nearly 500 people came to our little quaint town to celebrate. There was imported wine and cheese, ham and baked goods, everything a man could need to fill his belly and party the night away. As the night carried on, the festival continued. More joined in until not a scrap of food was left. Father told us that the mayor ordered all to come to the town hall and take part in a grander festival there, one that would ring in the new year with resounding triumph. By midnight, the revelry had died down, and the partygoers were exhausted in the old building. The streets were empty, only littered with footprints and wasted food. And then, a knock came to the door. Father Strom, a devout man of the cloth, went to answer and never returned. Then an hour passed, and another knock came. This time, his wife went to the door, and the same thing happened. The other partygoers likely would never know about their disappearances were it not for the screams that came from the square. It was enough to wake the whole assembly. Raya Claude, a girl of no more than 12 years of age at the time, ran to the door and flung it open wide, peering into the misty early morning dawn as she went after the screams. Father Strom and his wife were not hard to find. They were dancing in the town square, but not the way that ordinary couples might. Something had infected them. A madness of some kind. Their bare feet were swollen and bloody, a mindless trail circling around the statues in the square. But some claim that the statues danced too. These structures were crafted to resemble angels, long-gone saints that would protect the city from evil, but that night they appeared as demons, holding strings over Strom and his wife the way a marionette maestro would. The ones that saw the dancing felt compelled to join in. An endless, insane fray of music and mayhem ensued. Raya claimed that the statues laughed as the people continued to dance. But their merriment did not end, even when the last person collapsed to the cobblestone street. The great old ones moved from their perches of stone to the ground below, their mighty marble wings shielding most from seeing what would happen. Raya hid behind a house to get a better peek, to view a nightmare. The gargoyles began to feast on the people that were still wailing and chanting, their dead eyes looking straight at Raya, accusingly as she shuddered. They tore apart the bodies like dogs that had been begging for scraps, the screams joining a church choir for Christmas morning worship. Somehow the young girl found the courage to run. She didn't really know where to go except to escape the haunting sight of the monsters. But the angels did not stop when they had eaten all those poor victims. They wanted to go hunting. By this time, Raya had sounded the warning to the outskirts of town, near the pubs and the taverns that were at the riverside. Of course, the drunkards only laughed and jeered at her, and their foolish, harsh mockery only allowed the hunting party of the undead to find them with little effort. The first to die there was a man named Malroy Smith. Raya said that he was stronger than an ox, but the angels were able to crush him like a piece of paper. They ripped his innards out and strung his intestines like harpcords. Then they played a haunting siren call to get the others to leave the tavern. Raya said she watched half the town go to their deaths that night. When asked why she was spared, Raya offered me a jar where she kept her bloodied ears. She showed me the scars on her head and explained how she thought quickly for her own survival. Chop them off, she said. It was the only way to be free of their endless call. And now every year she travels to the old ghost town, lay sacrifice to the statues, and appease the dead, hoping that they never return. They joined us that night because we forgot to make a meal for them, she explained. It's not a tradition that we can simply forget, she warned. I've promised her I will do my best to keep it alive. But something tells me the ghosts that haunt her every waking moment will have no trouble doing that themselves. Dear listeners, some of you have asked, and rightly so, what sparked my interest in the uncanny surrounding this blessed time of year. It might surprise you to learn that I am not a devout Christian, or even celebrate the holiday at all. Digging into cultural phenomena has always been a hobby of mine, and paganism even more so. Something about leaving no stone unturned fascinated me. Nothing about our modern Christmas is anywhere near the practices of old, so it seems only proper for someone to set the record straight, so to speak. It may not be the answer you hoped for, but truth often shatters the comforts of lies. The unexpected guest. Lisa Landry often held parties at her estate before her death, and Christmas was no exception. Her guests were the upper crust, the well-to-do of local society, and Henry Satin was no different. The way he put it, if you wanted to matter at all in society, you needed to be at the Landry Christmas party. Everyone was dressed to impress for the occasion. Satin, a business partner with the local community theater, said that he was there to land a promotion. His manager, the ever-boisterous Ian Munch, was weaving about the party, flirting with anything breathing. You could almost smell the pompous attitudes of all that attended, Henry explained. To get an invitation was compared to a golden ticket. But this was no fictional factory for children to run around. It was a statement of success for those that Landry deemed worthy. No one there showed an ounce of poverty. As you might expect then, it was a bit of a shock when Lucas, the butler, reported a homeless man roaming about the driveway. There was a commotion near the main hall as people speculated who it could be. The Landry's estate was far from the main highways, a private road that could only be accessed through a gate down the hill. There was no way that Alistair, Landry's chief of security, would have let some vagabond just roam up here. And then Henry told me that one of the guests had an idea. It was going to be late, and the temperature was dropping rapidly, so Emily Richardson suggested that we let the man in for a warm meal. Well, it didn't go over so well. Who knows what sort of disease that tramp might be carrying, some said. Others suggested that the only reason the man was there was to steal from Liza. After all, her items were worth millions. While they were debating, somehow the man found a way inside to the crowd. Henry said that no one could really recall exactly how the homeless man had gotten inside, simply that he now was there. The crowd seemed to disperse as he moved towards the main master staircase, his breath a toxic cloud of booze and meth. Henry claimed, however, that this man did not seem to be an ordinary drunk. It was something else entirely. The air had suddenly gotten a lot colder when he arrived, and the crowd quieter. I think we all could sense that whatever this man was doing here, his intentions were not pure. Then the homeless man pointed a finger accusingly towards Landry and called her by her maiden name. Some said that she fainted, but Henry told me otherwise. She was standing on the balcony overlooking the party when this man just gave her the death stare. It made her panic, and she tried to run, but somehow her feet fell from under her. She toppled over the banister, and she fell to the stairs below. I'll never forget that sickening sound when her body broke on the marble steps. Music stopped when everyone realized that the master of the house was dead. And suddenly, the homeless man was gone. Henry said that he was the one that phoned the police. And everyone corroborated a different story for them. It was an accident, they told authorities. Not a soul mentioned the homeless man or the vendetta that he seemed to have for Landry. Henry seemed content with his version of events, despite the fact that it left so much untold. But you must know by now my curiosity got the better of me, and I had to go see the house for myself. Where decadence and splendor stood, it's just a monument to failure now. The gates of iron were overgrown with kudzu, and I found a way through easily. The ground felt like they were whispering to me, telling me which way to go. The police tape was still there, the house now abandoned and boarded up. With Landry gone, no parties would be held here anymore. Inside, I shone a flashlight to push past cobwebs and dust. search for clues that would give me an idea of who this uninvited guest was. I recalled the detail that Henry mentioned the man spoke of Landry's maiden name. It made me choose to climb the stairs and search for her belongings. What had happened to her family before she started to throw such lavish parties? Word on the street said that she had inherited all of it from her husband, a bad case of cancer that she had tended to dutifully. I pulled out drawers, pushed aside bookshelves, even turned over mattresses. But it was barren. A sharp, stiff breeze floated through the house when I made my way back to the stairs. I had already guessed that I was going to be visited by my own visitor that unholy night. "You're not gonna find anything. She made every trace of me disappear years ago," the homeless man said. A better look at him told me that this was, in fact, Landry's husband. The photos on the mantel matched almost perfectly. But how could he be here if dead all those years ago? "This is my house now," the spirit told me. "I will be the one to host parties," he intoned as he pointed for me to leave. I didn't have the courage to ask the details of his life, for fear that he might choose to take my own. So I passed by the spectral visitor and I tipped my hat, vowing to never return. Since that time, I wondered if I had imagined the whole thing as an explanation for what Landry had done. And clearly she had murdered her spouse and used the party as an excuse to commit suicide. This was the logical explanation. But then, Christmas looms closer, and I get a card in the mail. An invitation from the Landry estate to attend their party. A reminder of what ill fate will occur should others choose fame over family. Dear listener, by now you must have guessed that the reason I'm telling you all of these dreadful tales before a holy day isn't just for kicks and giggles. Hardly. I am no monster. I once lived a normal life before being forced to live out my days in the back of a restaurant, hide from local law enforcement. Though you must think I lack some sanity, devoting so much time to piecing together ghosts that no one else cares about. And maybe it's true. Maybe it's true that I lost a bit of my mind a long time ago. After all, the old paradox where I claimed to not be insane wouldn't really work given half of my time is spent in graveyards. There's just something comforting that history offers me, which no living soul can do. The ghosts are where I find I am most at home. Left out in the cold. Simon and Raoul were two Hispanic boys, praying for a white Christmas. Since they lived in rural country, where it was summer half the year, most of the grown-ups only scoffed and giggled when they brought up snow. But one winter, it really did. It was the worst on record, and it shut down power across the Tri-County area. The boys' parents were at a loss. They didn't have any food or power and didn't want their children to starve to death, so they put everyone in the back of their Chevy Suburban, and they started towards town. The family didn't make it farther than 2 miles down the road when they encountered black ice. The vehicle fell into a ditch, and Mom and Dad were killed instantly. Somehow the boys were spared and managed to crawl out to the highway and try to signal for help. But there weren't any other cars on the road, and their parents couldn't be brought back. so they only knew to keep trekking westward. The boys were trying to be strong. It was getting colder by the minute and darker. There wasn't a soul around. But there was someone, or something, the boys encountered that December night. As they moved through the road, they discovered the trees were down, and they had to find a way amid wood. With snow up to their ankles, the boys suddenly regretted all the times they had wished for. Their only thought was to avoid frostbite or starvation. But soon enough, they were lost amid a blizzard. The fog made it hard for them to know for sure which direction to turn. Were they going in circles? Who could say? Then from amid the shroud of ice and cold, a figure emerged. He was clad in fine clothes, better than any Simon or Raoul had ever seen on a Christmas morning. And he was tall and well-built like a hunter. Clearly these woods were where he spent most of his time. "Are you boys lost?" he asked, smoking a pipe and smiling towards them. "Yes, sir," Simon said, doing his best not to chatter his teeth together. "Well, it's a good thing that we met each other then," the man said, offering his hand in friendship. But Raoul was suspicious. Something about this stranger was off. Where had he come from? Where was he going? And why did he not show any signs of frost? Was the blizzard simply ignoring him? I know the answer now, but they are not the kind that you would hope for. The stranger was not a friendly face in the midst of their turmoil. He instead led them straight to their own demise. Somehow Simon convinced his brother that they should follow the hunter and offer their names. The old man said his name was Astor Smith, from a nearby harbor town, and that he was just in the area for the reason to do some elk hunting. He talked their ear off as he guided them to a supposed rescue. But neither of the boys could have guessed that he was actually leading them to their doom. Eventually they reached a summit, and the boys realized they were farther from the road or home than ever before. Raoul tried to confront the man about it, but Astor had changed. He wasn't wearing a friendly face anymore. Instead, his appearance was ghastly, and his skin covered in boils. He made a high-pitched shriek, and somehow brought forth an axe from the mist. He severed Raoul first, cutting the boy's head off and giving his brother a chance to run. Or so Simon thought. The truth is, Astor was actually in the mood for a bit of sport. The ghost knew the poor boy couldn't find his bearings amid the blizzard, so he toyed with him for the next hour. The ghost took his brother's head along too, to dangle it and tease Simon about what would befall him. Ironically, though, the ghost didn't get to kill Simon. Instead, the poor boy actually ran off another cliffside, slipped and fell and busted his head upon a rock. The bodies were found the next spring by tree trimmers, trying their best to clear the roads after that foul weather. No one could rightly explain how it was that the first boy lost his head, so they hired a medium named Sabrina Maywester. Maywester had gotten some acclaim from a nearby company helping form a seance, and the town folks asked her to do the same for the boys. She told me that it was difficult to lie to them and tell them that the boys had simply faced terrible accidents. People want safe and comforting fairy tales. That's why they tell their parents about Santa. They don't want to confront the possibility of the supernatural. Don't you believe that that ghost of the hunter may still be out there, hunting others? I asked her. It's almost Christmas. so I'm sure of it. I placed some flowers on the boys' graves to remember them. But I'm afraid I don't think I can ever get so close to a case again. I felt eyes upon me at the cemetery, as though a spectral force was watching me from beyond. It is my belief that as I gather these clues, I am inciting a dark force to come to my door. But there's no turning back when I know there are more dangerous and cosmic terrors ahead. The search for truth demands I face this fear. I have humbly asked Maywest to stay in contact with me, though. Should anything happen, it will be her duty to relay these messages to the living. Something tells me I will come close to needing her services very soon. Dear listener, Christmas Eve has always had a special place in my heart. The children go to bed early. The streets become empty. There isn't a light on for miles, and often you can stare into the stars. That actually isn't the reason at all why I enjoy it, but I figured that if I painted a warm and cozy scene, you might forget for a brief moment that the majority of my research focuses on the supernatural. The actual reason that I enjoy Christmas Eve is because the veil between worlds often is lifted early to begin celebrating the mingling of souls. And that means a chance to observe paranormal occurrences is heightened. Is this odd? Quite likely. But then again, I don't recall asking for your opinion either. Bloodbath. Most people who work for Thornton and Hewley likely never knew how eccentric or outlandish their CEO was. Jessica Aolin wasn't so lucky. She ran a catering company in the area, and the law office decided to hire her for a Christmas Eve party a few years back. For Jessica, she thought that it would be easy money.
There were a lot of people there from all around the entire city. I guess I never realized how many people work for Mr. Dalen. For the event, Dalen had requested a variety of dishes. None of them seemed particularly festive, but I knew it was common for a lot of people to forget the reason for the season.
Jessica said that she made only 5 of the dishes on the list, given that she had been hired at such short notice.
I didn't know this at the time, but I was basically sloppy seconds. All the other bigger caterers had already been called and refused. I wish I had known what they knew about Dalen and his company.
When she got there to the party, most of the law firm was already drunk. Dalen was requesting that the main dishes be served at the 16th floor conference room, and Jessica had her hands full. It really didn't surprise me to realize that she had no idea what was actually going on there. My research has found that this particular law office was well known for another reason, though. Mr. Dalen had extremely morbid fascinations with the occult. Perhaps it might even have rivaled mine. And before Jessica arrived that evening, the head of the company had requested that all of his senior executives gather at the conference room and begin a supernatural ritual to contact the dead. Yes, Dalen wanted them to perform a seance. He had even hired a medium to make sure the ritual went off without a hitch. Jessica, meanwhile, was walking into this shadowy conference room offering eggnog and warm roast beef, unaware of the fact that her world was about to change forever. As you may or may not be aware, tampering with the unnatural order of the astral plane is dangerous, especially if you don't know what you're doing. The medium hired was only a 2-year novice, having mostly gained fame from local small towns, proclaiming details about missing persons and long-lost husbands. The stories were accurate. The ghosts always told the truth. But this sort of seance was something entirely new to her, and the ritual did not go as planned. There was a shudder that shook the entire company. Some claimed that it was an earthquake, but I've checked records. No seismic activity could be found that day. What happened over the next few hours, though? Oh, that can't be argued by anyone who lived nearby. The lawyers suddenly became extremely violent towards each other. Jessica said that she was able to serve Mr. Dalen a slice of meatloaf when he started to foam at the mouth.
His eyes rolled back, and he sounded like he was possessed.
It didn't take a stretch of the imagination to realize that was precisely what was happening. He and his entire board of directors had unwittingly unleashed a swarm of angry spirits. The power went out shortly after this, and these well-dressed businessmen turned on each other without hesitation, using everything within reaching distance as a weapon. Jessica showed me a wound where Dalen actually bit her arm, and described to me in detail how others used chairs and fire extinguishers to bash at one another.
I stumbled toward the back of the room, where that damn medium was trying to escape, and demanded that she help me. She grabbed my arm, and we crawled through the carnage.
When they reached the elevator, the two of them were attacked one last time by an accountant. He was spitting angry, toxic fire from his eyes and mouth, every trace of his human appearance melting away. The ghost wanted one final victim. The medium said that she invoked a binding spell, a last-ditch attempt to stop the evil spectral force. Somehow, it worked. They rode to the ground floor and ran to find the nearest phone to contact the police. By the time the authorities had arrived, all of the people in the building had finished slaughtering one another.
I came to retrieve my items from my company. It was horrendous. Eyes were scattered on the floor, people mutilated from fingernails, spine tissue dangling on stairs. I've never seen such carnage before.
I believe there's more to this story than just a warning of tampering with the unknown. These spirits were angry for a reason. A brief look into the accounting books of the company have told me what may be the answer.
The company purchased an entire city not long back. It had fallen on hard times and they needed money, but they didn't take into account an old curse that hadn't been lifted.
The medium told me. In case you hadn't realized, she was the same person who assisted me to know what befell Simon and Raoul. Now, it was occurring to me that the ghost stories I thought may not be connected actually had a deeper meaning to one another. The answer was there, at Harbor Bay. Dark forces seem to have a habit of circling the area. They even followed me, perhaps because of all that I've uncovered. But still, I must know more. I guess you know where I'll be spending Christmas. If I make it until then, I mean. Dear listener, wherever you are, whatever you may be doing, I humbly ask you to stop and look around at the people you are surrounded by. Are you with family, friends, workmates, strangers? If your answer is yes to any of those, you should consider yourself fortunate. my Christmas will not be so bright. There aren't any children I am hurrying home to, or even friends I need to call and wish a happy holiday. These connections are long gone from me. All that remains are the memories of a life I tossed away in the pursuit of knowledge. Where did it get me? Surprising, or perhaps not so much so, depending on your worldview. Not very far. Old Man Astor. I've seen pictures of abandoned places before, but it felt entirely different driving over the countryside and stepping into what was literally a ghost town. I could feel the spirit's eyes on me as I drove in, looking for any signs of life. I had dozens of questions that needed to be answered, and all of them seemed to lead here to this lonesome lake town. I've gathered so many stories that connect to Harbor Bay. I'm beginning to think that maybe my own story is somehow linked to this place. Soon enough, I was in the town square, where Raya claimed that she had laid down flowers before moss-covered statues. The entire place was dilapidated, with roots growing out from the streets and vines covering every window and door. Not exactly the most welcome place to spend Christmas morning. And the statues were almost entirely broken apart, as though someone had come by to smash them to bits. A drive down the road showed me what had happened. Bulldozers from the accounting firm were in the streets, rusted and pushing back debris. Clearly, Thornton's business had tried in vain to rekindle a spark of life here, but the forces from beyond had decided that they wanted to keep a hold of it. What made this place so special, I wondered, as I moved up to the richer districts. It occurred to me that Lisa Landry had likely once called this place her home before she married. Would I possibly meet her spectral husband again? Surprisingly, instead, I met an old man that looked like he was a part of the scenery. He resembled a hunter, a sportsman that was moving about the ruins in search of a kill. When he saw me, I suspected that he was sizing me up to decide if I was prey. "You've come a long way," the old man said. His voice sounded colder than any winter I'd ever endured. I thought back to Maywester and her warning about this charming fellow. I knew immediately who this had to be. "Old Man Astor, I take it?" I asked. "In the flesh, so to speak. But I don't think you came here to meet me," he said, with a gleam in his eye. Mischievous and dangerous. I kept my distance and raised a firearm that I had brought with me. Truth be told, I'm not sure why. I knew that being dead it would do no good, but Astor still seemed shocked by my fears and violent spirit. "It's Christmas. Is that really the way you want to spend the most blessed day of the year?" Astor asked. "I came for answers. Quit playing games," I ordered. Astor raised his hands defensively and grabbed his cane, pointing toward a slope where I saw the old cemetery. "All of your needless searching will lead you there, boy," he told me. I turned to look at the old gravestones, feeling a sense of foreboding take hold. What was he leading me towards? My feet seemed to move of their own accord up the hill, desperate to understand. It was nearly midday when I got to the graveyard, alone and forgotten by everyone that ever cared for it. There weren't many headstones, but all of them told a story or two. Families slain by guardian angels that had once overlooked Harbor Bay. Husbands that were murdered by greedy wives for fame and fortune. Sons that were slaughtered by cold winter. There was an air of dread over every unfortunate soul that had come here. And then I saw a tombstone that bore my own name, and I felt altogether taken aback with shock. At first I ignored the obvious and thought maybe this was a Christmas trick, like what Dickens had written about. A warning from beyond to fix my life, otherwise I would wind up here, forgotten by everyone I had ever cared for, or perhaps forgotten by the world entirely. Like all of the other ghosts that had haunted this place. Instead, reading the inscription there on the stone had enlightened me to a story of my own life. A story I had forgotten. My name was Henry Landry. I was the husband of a beautiful wife, Liza, and the father of two amazing children, Simon and Raoul. The town of Harbor Bay had fallen on hard times. A dreadful businessman named Howard Dalen had purchased the entire town with the intention of modernizing it, but not long after went bankrupt and committed suicide. As a result, the poor fools in Harbor Bay sunk into poverty. People turned on one another one particularly dangerous winter. Neighbors slaughtering each other when they realized some of the townsfolk were actually hoarding food underneath Father Strom's church. My wife and I tried to find food and power as the winter got worse, but then we hit a strip of black ice. And I died instantly. My boys managed to crawl out, only to later get lost in the woods and die of starvation. Liza was the lucky one, having gotten EMTs to save her. Her entire life changed in a single instance. My life insurance paid for her mansion, her decadent lifestyle, and helped her to forget about me and the boys. It was this callous attitude that brought me back to this world, to make her pay for what she had done. It occurred to me now that the ghost I had seen at her estate was simply my own reflection, trying to help me piece together the forgotten tapestry of my memories. All of this came crashing down as I turned to see Old Man Astor gazing at me thoughtfully. He didn't seem as dangerous or vile as before. His clothes were clad in white, like an angel might have. Then he smiled at me and said, "It's time to rejoin your family in heaven, Henry." I looked down at the graves, still torn apart at how much of my life had been taken away. But knowing my purpose in this world was fulfilled, and the stories of those who I had connected with was now told. I agreed with him. I made but one request, which you know of now, listener. As a spirit, it would be impossible for me to create these memoirs and have them be told, so I made clear that the recordings be given to Sabrina Maywester. She was, after all, the psychic she claimed to be, having used her services in the past to expose charlatans like Dalen and my wife. If you are hearing this now, that means that she followed my own Christmas wish and relayed the information to others so that these ghost stories can live on. This is where my own tortured soul now rests. But that doesn't mean that the other spirits can be quieted, which is why I remind you of my original request. Tell tales of those who have passed on. Otherwise, we may still haunt you forevermore. Staring at the tree, whiskey in hand, Pete was pleased that this year would be different from the last. It had been the strangest time of his life, but he truly felt like things were finally coming together, and when better to come together than at Christmas, the time that he loved more than any other. In some ways, the past year had been like an eternity. In others, as if it had succumbed to time in the blink of an eye. But either way, he was glad to see the back of it. Staring at the Christmas tree, its beautiful lights casting a warm hue over the room, and the snow quietly falling outside as the sun set, Pete began to think of this past year, of his daughter, Lana, and his wife, Janet. It had started with a very normal December 12 months earlier, the residents spending most of their days clearing driveways, and Pete's wife going off for one of her usual wanders. She had been gone for a couple of hours, but while Janet was utterly devoted to her family, she still needed moments to herself, to clear her head, to diminish the stress that comes with a loving yet disorganized husband and a little girl who was kind, but whom enjoyed trying her parents' patience as much as possible. When the tensions of a domestic life clouded her feelings or began to weigh on her spirits, Janet would wander out of the back door into the fields and woodlands, which characterized the entire area, and trek for a little while through the pines which dotted the landscape. It therefore wasn't unusual for her to be gone for fairly long periods, especially since it was around that time of year when she would take it upon herself to choose the Christmas tree. No matter how much Pete or Lana asked to help out, this was Janet's job. She loved the tradition of it, the process of choosing the best possible tree, cutting it down, and then seeing the bright smiles on her family's faces as they would gleefully take the tree indoor and decorate it with sparkling glitter garlands, warm glowing lights, and an array of festive baubles. It was a small highland town where they lived, far away from any major city, but Janet and the rest of her family loved their home, the simplicity of it, the feeling of being an integral part of a close-knit community, and of course, the beautiful surroundings. Lush during the Scottish summer and cold, crisp, stark, but yet awe-inspiring in the winter. Most importantly, she loved the pine woods nearby, specifically a collection of trees which sat at the top of a small hill within the walking distance from the house. Perfect for picking a Christmas tree. She would return there each year, and while their numbers thinned due to a few other neighbors going there for the exact same purpose, there were enough trees to last a good many years. When she had been gone for 3 hours, Pete began to grow nervous, as this was longer than usual, and since it was getting dark, he took it upon himself to venture outside, telling Lana to lock the doors after him and that he would not be long. Lana laughed when he told her that he expected that Mummy would be struggling through the snow with a huge tree, bigger than any that they had ever had before. Pete loved to see the excitement in his daughter's face at the time of year, and he told her to watch from her bedroom window to see what they would bring back. But this, she excitedly ran up the stairs straight to her window before he had to call her back down to lock the door. Gazing at the beautiful tree, he could remember that night like it was yesterday. The snow was crisp on the ground and crunched under his feet as it began to freeze. Small flakes fell from the sky occasionally, but Janet's footprints remained uncovered. Even without them, Pete knew where they were heading. The hill where Janet returned each year was only a 40-minute hike away. She would pick a pine tree from there. In fact, sometimes she would pick two. One around 6 foot, and the other a young tree about half the size, if they could find one suitable. It was difficult at the time to find smaller trees as they seemed to be rare in that area. and everyone in the town seemed to like the idea of having a small tree in their children's bedroom, so people would climb up there with an axe and take what they wanted. So there weren't many at hand. Lana at one time had thought that it was sad to cut down and kill the trees just for people to look at, but Pete explained to her about the tradition, and he was sure that more would grow back. With time, she forgot this protest and looked forward to the years when she could have one. If a smaller tree couldn't be found, they had a lovely, synthetic one which would sit at her window. Secretly, she loved this just as much. But as her father had said, tradition is tradition. The larger tree would be placed in the living room, and adorned with an assortment of baubles, glittered decorations, and lights. The other in Lana's room, which would be sprayed with a can of fake snow and covered in hanging candy canes and chocolates. Although she was always told that she could only have one a day before bed as a treat. Of course, occasionally she would break this rule and just hope no one would notice. Janet could always tell, but she would let it go. Christmas time was the best of times after all, and it was so brief. As Pete approached the hill, he knew something was wrong. He felt it in his bones. As he climbed, the snow began to fall in greater volume, and the sky dimmed with it. Standing at the humble summit, a stillness spread, silence interrupted momentarily by the almost audible patter of snowflakes floating gently to the ground. He followed the footprints now with purpose, knowing that if the snowfall increased, that it would be nearly impossible to find Janet. Twilight fell, covering everything in a dark blue wisp of color as the frost began to nip at his new rosy cheeks. The footprints bobbed and weaved their way through the huge pines, and finally stopping next to a wonderfully thick and vibrant tree. One which was perfectly suited for their purposes. The perfect sized, almost 7 feet tall, a dark, life-filled green, and a thick abundance of branches and pine, which made it almost impossible to visually penetrate its cover in such a light. But yet Janet was nowhere to be seen. As far as Pete could tell, there was no other tracks in the snow leading away in any direction. She had almost certainly been here. But where had she gone? It was both puzzling and worrying. It seemed impossible. But there they were. Janet's last 2 footprints engraved in the ground, with the snow all around, virgin, undisturbed, and lacking all signs of life. It was as if she had just vanished into the night. Looking at the base of the tree, Pete ran his fingers over a deep gash in its trunk. There was no doubt about it. Janet had taken a few swipes at it with an axe. Then, for some unknown reason, she had left. Or perhaps moved on to a tree that she felt was more suitable. Surely not, though. This tree was perfect. That must have been it, though. She must have moved on. Perhaps there was some random, freakish flurry of snow which covered her tracks. That must have been it. But Pete knew this was wishful thinking. He had lived there for years, and in all of that time he had never seen such a thing. And then he saw it. Several meters away, lying in the snow, was Janet's axe. He rushed over to the object, falling once as the snow deepened. Rising to his feet, it was now unmistakable. Yes, it was partially covered in snow, but it was Janet's axe. It lay there much like the footprints, isolated, but with the absence of any human imprints. It was as if the tool had been dropped from a great height, but Pete did not care to speculate. The sense of growing worry permeated his mind as the thought of Janet lying somewhere injured increased his anxiety. Shouting his wife's name repeatedly drew no reply as darkness now began to creep even closer. If she was hurt, he would have to raise the alarm and get the town out looking for her, along with the mountain rescue. She wouldn't survive long in the snow, in that biting cold. At this thought, the panic grew. Worry, fear, hurt that could only be felt through love. With torch in hand, he continued in the direction the axe had taken him. As he entered a thick bend of pine trees, he noticed the broken branches littered on the ground as if something had been rushing past, tearing them apart and breaking them off on impact. Maybe Janet ran through here. The scale of the damage, however, looked too great to have been dealt by one person alone. Had he been in any other country, he would have assumed a bear was nearby. But they had been hunted to extinction in Scotland long ago, along with the wolves and any other predators. For a moment, his torch reflected off something scuttling under a bush, but it looked more like an insect than anything else, and again, far too small to cause such devastation. Pete fixed his scarf, trying to cover his face as the frost bit deeper. But just as he did so, something caught his eye, something on the ground. Shining his torch on what at first he thought to be a dead animal was the crumpled body of Janet, lying still on the ground. A heart attack, they said. A heart attack. But Pete had seen her face. He had looked upon those eyes, once so filled with kindness, transfixed in a frozen stare, cold, glassy, black with fear. Her hands were clenched in front of her, and the pathologist told him that this was perfectly normal for someone suffering such a massive heart attack in such low temperatures. As was the contorted look on her face, although at the mention of this, Pete saw a flicker in the pathologist's eyes which gave away that he was as puzzled by that look as anyone. A look Pete would never forget. Darling Janet, love of his life, mother of his children, dying alone in the cold with lips pulled back over teeth in agony, frozen into an inhuman sneer. The whole ordeal was devastating for him. If it hadn't been for their daughter Lana, for the necessity of her needs to be met before his own, Pete would have found it nearly impossible to have gotten through it. The past 12 months had been cluttered with reminders of an aching loss. As with any bereavement, the first time of doing something once shared without that person made the pain more acute. The first Christmas, the first day at work, the first walk to school, the first family get-together, every person's face etched in concern, accompanied by the usual well-meaning but empty traditions of, "How are you holding up?" It must have been so difficult. And if there's anything I can do. Helping his daughter through the loss of her mother was all he had to make sure that he could face another day. But they stopped now. They had been through the horror, through the denial, through the silent meals, through the lonely cries of despair at night, through the birthdays empty and somber. They had been through it all. All these firsts were over. It had been over 12 months since Janet's death, and Pete felt almost exhilarated by this. He still missed her every day. The pain would never leave him, but the feeling of accomplishment, of strength, something which he thought had deserted him, that he had endured, filled him for the first time with thoughts of the future. Thoughts that life does indeed go on, even when our dearest have gone before us. And what of his beautiful daughter? Dear, kind Lana. He may have felt compelled to bring her through the past year, but her empathy and strength had left him in awe, characteristics which someone so young had no right to possess, but which were thankfully present nonetheless. When she had cried, he had been there, and on more than one occasion, when he lay sobbing, staring at that empty void of space in his double bed at night, Lana would waken and climb in beside him
and they would both cry together until they fell asleep. She was his rock, and by God, she was going to have the best Christmas that she'd ever had. Pete had made a number of arrangements. He had spent a fortune on every gift imaginable. He had filled the house with every food and treat that she enjoyed, and both Janet's parents and his own were flying in for Christmas dinner to be with their brave, sweet granddaughter. He'd also organized for Lana's friends to have a sleepover on Boxing Day, which she had pleaded for, but Pete always knew that he would give in eventually. She never asked for much, but this year, this Christmas, she would have more than she could imagine. The house was perfect, but there was one thing left to do, one thing that Pete had dreamt of since the night that he found Janet's body. She had chosen this tree. It was going to be sitting in their living room, adorned with all manner of decorations. That was its purpose, its very reason for being. Janet never finished cutting the damn thing down. It was, in many ways, her dying act. And Pete was going to make sure that it was fulfilled. On the anniversary of her death, he wandered through the snow, winding his way through the pines until he stood at the foot of the ominous little hill. The sun shone brightly, and it wasn't as cold as it had been the night Janet died, but each footstep was accompanied by a sickness in the pit of Pete's stomach. Each stride a morbid reminder of the previous year and that terrible heartbreak in the snow. Marching to its peak, he first walked to and observed the scene of Janet's untimely death. Standing there where her body had laid, Pete wiped the tears from his eyes and placed a small Santa figurine on the ground, burying it in the snow. It had always been hung from the branches of each yearly tree, and was her favorite decoration. It seemed only right that it be with her. After another few minutes of trudging, there it was. It was still standing, the damn tree, as if ravenous for revenge. Pete pulled Janet's axe from his backpack and charged at the pine. He battered and chopped at the cut which Janet had made the previous year, making it deeper with each slice, with every pound of pressure that he could muster. The tree groaned and creaked as if in pain, but Pete did not care. This tree was the final reminder of Janet's death. Whatever had happened that night, it happened because of that tree. As crazy as it seemed, it all made sense for a moment, and then clarity was clouded by mundane reality. She had simply died of natural causes. With the roar of cracking wood breaking under its own weight, the tree swooned and collapsed to the ground in defeat. Tying a rope around its trunk, and then using a string to fold its branches inward, Pete dragged this memory, that cold-hearted pillar of nature's brutality, through the snow, over grass and gravel, and finally to his back door. He was victorious. With little thought of carpet or furniture, he dragged it up the stairs into the house and placed it in front of the window in the living room, wedging it upright into an old wooden stump that they had used as a stand every year. Breathless and covered in sweat, he stood back, looking at the tree standing tall over all it surveyed. "You picked a good one, love. You picked a good one." He held back the tear and waited for Lana to return home from her friends. Pete put an old Christmas film on the television as they both decorated the tree together, singing, laughing, and being a family. There were moments, fleeting glances, and they caught one another's stare. A glance which showed pain buried deep down inside, one which said, "I miss her too." But it was Christmas, and the moments of grief passed, buffered by long, caring periods of happiness. Contentment caressed smiles from ear to ear, and festive spirits once more filled that home, which had for too long been host to loss and anguish. As night began to fall after Lana went to bed, earlier than usual because of the excitement had worn her out, Pete decided to reward himself for the day's efforts. The lights were dimmed, and after pouring himself a large whiskey, he sat down on the living room couch and stared at the tree, draped in tinsel, garland, and adorned with bright white Christmas lights. It really was a sight to behold. The best tree they had ever had. "Here's to you, gorgeous," Pete said, lifting his drink to the sky in a symbolic gesture. Staring at the Christmas tree, its beautiful lights casting a warm hue over the room, and the snow quietly falling outside as the sun set, Pete began to think of the past year, of his daughter, Lana, and his wife, Janet. Time passed slowly as he thought of all things gone, how they had led to this moment through pain and suffering, but now, hopefully onward to the future, and one filled with at least the briefest possibility of joy. The glow from the tree reflected off the window, but it penetrated far enough to illuminate the now thick blur of snow, falling to the ground silently outside. The room remained dark, but the lights bathed everything subtly in a warm Yuletide radiance, which, when accompanied by the orange lemon-sea of the fire, only served to cultivate the anticipation for Christmas even more so. For the first time in a year, Pete was happy. Something bothered him, though. There was a slight apprehension or annoyance at the back of his mind, something which was spoiling the display. Sipping at his whiskey, casting a glance at the entire room, he finally saw what the problem was. 2 of the Christmas tree lights were occasionally flickering. Not constantly, but often enough to be noticeable. And more importantly, aggravating. Downing the rest of his drink, Pete rose to his feet, now feeling the aches in his muscles from the effort exerted while dragging the thing all the way home from the hill. Walking over to the tree, the lights were indeed flickering, but there was something unusual about them. They seemed deeper than the rest, as if coming from the trunk rather than resting on the branches. Again, Pete was struck by how dark the interior of the tree was. That even in the presence of many lights placed upon it, he could not peer or adequately see between the branches. Even the 2 lights which set deeper behind the pines did not seem to illuminate their surrounding in any way. The empty glass slipped from his fingers, smashing on the floor. The lights were fine. They were not flickering at all, but the occasional blinking of 2 eyes amongst the branches had been enough to catch his attention. He froze to the spot, and it was as if the room grew somehow darker. Something stirring between the pines, between the knotted wood and the scratching, porous surface. Something lived there. A feeling of utter paralysis now took hold, his feet firmly glued to the ground as the 2 eyes slowly pushed forward. Creaking and cracking, a face revealed itself from behind the pine and branches, as if seeping out from its innermost visceral point. Mold-covered, ancient, its features twisted in rage. Fear began to course through Pete's veins. His heart beat faster and faster as the face moved closer, its eyes, devoid of pupils, now swamped in a maddening yellow, and from below, the protrusion of 2 thin, moss-covered legs arched out from between the branches, With a creak and snap, it straightened itself, now standing on all its terrible glory in front of the tree. It was now pitch black outside, and it would have been clear to Pete that this animal, this creature, was of a nocturnal nature. But in its stare, he found himself helpless. His heart skipped. First it was a palpitation. Then he could feel a searing pain in his left arm. He clutched his chest, but his feet remained adhered to the ground. It was impossible to look away from those yellow, unmarked eyes. Its gaze came closer still, and in the pain which it brought, Pete knew he was going to die. To be found like Janet, cold, face contorted, and the second victim of that which was living amongst the pine on that hill. The pain was now unbearable, but the paralysis removed the possibility of a scream. What little light there was from the fireplace now illuminated its head, elongated on the side, and pulsating on the other, its face dominated by a large, dark hole which appeared in place of a mouth or nose, one which no light could penetrate, and its boil-ridden head stooped to meet his own, and the hole in its face almost touched his mouth. An involuntary sneer pulled Pete's lips up to reveal his teeth, as his face contorted into an entirely unnatural position. And that one word, a word so powerful, so pure, that even the most evil intention could be dispelled by it. Daddy? With a snap of wood, the gargoyle-like creature turned its wide yellow gaze to Lana, standing at the bottom of the stairs in her pajamas. Her scream echoed out into the night, arms outstretched. Its odd-numbered fingers moved with a stutter as its moss-covered legs groaned, carrying it forward in a peculiar, unbalanced motion towards her. Now Lana was paralyzed by its stare, and with each step closer, her face contorted more fiercely, and the pain in her chest brought her to the point of unconsciousness. As intense as its gaze was, it was focused. So focused that it didn't notice Pete clawing his way across the floor towards the kitchen. The wooden creature's unsure movements made it appear more like a puppet than a thing of autonomous purpose, and as it reached Lana, it cupped her face in an uneven hand and stared wide-eyed and pupilless into her face. Tears streamed down her cheeks. The sound of feet running filled the air, and as it twisted to investigate, a loud crack was heard as Pete ran up into the couch, jumping high into the air and bringing Lana's axe down deep into its spine. No blood ran or gushed, but a plague of unfamiliar insect-like critters poured out from the wound. Instead of a howling pain, the creature emitted a crescendo of strange squeals and clicks before throwing Pete to the ground and smashing through the door. Lana's father gave chase, but it was impossible as the wooden creature moved at an unimaginable pace, gliding on the ground with each stride, leaving no footprint in the snow. After a visit to the nearest hospital, both Lana and her father were given a clean bill of health. But they never returned to the house, filled with memories of good times. The happy times of a mother, a wife, a kind soul, of birthdays, and a wedding. And of course, Christmas time. Pete didn't know what the creature was, whether it was alive or dead, or something else entirely inconceivable to the human mind. But he had made a solemn promise to himself from that moment on. Never again would he cut down a tree, decorate it, and take enjoyment in its appearance as it died. Because no matter how pretty they are, no matter how much warmth they may give, no matter how much they might make people think of Christmas, you just don't know what may be living inside.
Hey, did you like that creepypasta story that you heard today? I bet you did, because you stuck around to hear the outro. So, if you want to find more creepypasta stories like this, check out The links in the description down below that lead you over to the Creepypasta collection, Volume 1 and Volume 2. Volume 1 and Volume 2 also have a bunch of stories from some of the best authors I've worked with in the past 15 years, which I think is pretty high praise, seeing as it's like, what, 4,000 stories? That's right, 4,000 stories. Subscribe, you'll see them. But yes, 2 books available, Amazon, link down below, check them out. Also, I want to give a huge thank you to everybody on this list of Patreons. Some of these amazing folks are Diana Kraus, AcidSystem, Blake Rattler, Brandon Mendoza, Brenna Crow, Caltuna, ChicagoHitman, CoryxKenshin, CrusaderChocobo, Dakota Best, Daniel Poulsen, Dante Kinkade, Enchanted Buns, Estebean, Hades' Nephew, himbojerry, Our Minute Seconds Time, Ingegerd Solstrom, Jay Kearns, Jadis Pet, McMog, Mr. Marcus Blitz, Psychomel, Plant Piz, Red Shadow Cat, Remember the Sun, Salty Surprise, Samara Lynn, Seclude, Simba's Bloody Mojo, Sky Harbor, Smiley the Psychotic, Sully Man, Tully Sue, Team Leo 76, The Demented Voice in Your Head, The Chavez Brothers, The Ginger Bros, Tommy Walters, Viceroy Scorn, William Wellington, Your Bro Keegan, Zabub, and Shadow Gardens. A huge thank you to you guys, everybody who shows up in the description down below, and as always, folks, sweet dreams.